Chapter 1. The great, dignified, benevolent goddess Isis, the mother of fertility and hope, the god of Horus, who protects Igut and illuminates the world with an inextinguishable light, the father Nuvan, who was born in the lotus of the beginning and created all things, the Ennead, who lives at the source of the holy river, all the gods who rule the earth and the sky. Please hear my prayer, the oracle of the gods. Only the purest and most devout heart can win the mercy of the gods. I am willing to offer my all to Isis. Please grant me the tear of the gods. Iko Maria was praying to the gods in a remote town on the border of the Hittite kingdom, which belonged to the empire of Igut. In this remote and desolate place, the town of Duk was not small. It had hundreds of families and 2,000 residents. The mayor, Dusty, was a noble with the title of Lord of Hittite. He was also a citizen of the empire of Igut and enjoyed the privileges of being a citizen of the empire of Igut. The reason why the mayor of such a remote town was so prominent was because of its special status. Duk belonged to the southernmost part of the territory of Saya, which belonged to the Hittite kingdom. Saya was famous for its three products, which were the most important commodities traded by the Hittite kingdom to the empire of Igut: iron, parangons, and cedar wood. Iron could be used to make the sharpest weapons, especially those refined by skilled craftsmen. Iron could be used to make armor and swords that were both sharp and tough. It was a symbol of strength, a weapon for guarding and plundering wealth. Many countries on the continent produced iron, but the output was still very limited. The production and trade of iron were strictly monopolized by the government. Hittite was the most famous iron. Although the iron output in Duk was not high, it produced very rare refined iron. Almost all the adults in the town were miners and blacksmiths. Cedar wood, produced in the western highlands of Hittite and in the mountains on both sides of the Euphrates River, was the best material for shipbuilding after being soaked in cold water, dried in the sun, dipped in oil and baked. Ships built with it could travel in lakes, rivers, and seas. Not only was it used by armies, but it was also necessary for merchants to travel between countries. The town of Duk did not produce cedar wood. Although there were many cedar trees in the east of the town, it was hard to imagine that a giant cedar tree could be cut down and transported from the mountains. The most important product of Duk was not fine iron, but parangons. Parangons were very rare on the continent. The Saya state of the Hittite kingdom was one of the major producers of parangons, and the town of Duk produced almost half of the parangons in the entire Saya state. Every country on the continent needed parangons, especially the noble priests of the shrines who had mastered the supreme divine incantations. Many commoners and slaves did not know what the god's stone was used for. They had only seen the god's stone embedded in the scepter of the priests or the armor and weapons of the noble warriors. It seemed to be a symbol of status, wealth, or divine power. The god's stone itself was the most expensive currency on the continent. One parangon was worth 20 times as much as the same weight of gold, and it was inseparable. The most common parangons were used as the noble currency. They were the same in texture, size, and shape. Their weight was also the standard of measurement on the continent. Bat was the weight of a parangon. It was said that the extravagant priests even used parangons as the standard weight on the scales. Iko Maria came to Duk with Roddik, the governor and priest of her hometown. Of course, what she prayed to the gods was not an ordinary parangon, but the legendary god's tear. Only by obtaining it could she be recognized by the high priests in the temple of Isis in Montefiore and become the adoratress of the goddess Isis. According to the legend, only the purest summoning could communicate with the gods and receive the god's tear, which meant that her identity had been recognized by the gods. Iko Maria's prayer was so sincere, but in fact, every single parangon produced on the continent, including the precious god's tear, was not given by the hands of the gods. Instead, it was mined by the hands of the miners. Maria's residence was at the southern end of the town, near the temple of Horus. It was one of the most beautiful courtyards in the town, and it was originally the residence of the mayor. Like other towns on the continent, the most important building in the settlement was the temple, which was used to worship the local guardian gods. The magnificence of the temple was also a symbol of the prosperity of a city. Of course, The temple in Duk could not be compared to that in a big city, but compared to other ordinary towns, the temple of Horus here was magnificent enough. It was built with tall white boulders and inlaid with dark green stone sculptures. The white marble used to build the pillars was imported from other places, and the lapis lazuli was a local specialty of the nearby mountains. It might be expensive in other places, but it was the most common stone material in Duk. There were two main temples of similar size in the town of Duk. One was dedicated to Horus, the guardian god of the empire of Igut, to show the submission of this place to the pharaohs of Igut. It was built in the south of the town, and its main body was made of white marble. The other temple was dedicated to Murin, the guardian god of Hittite, who was widely worshipped in Hittite, Assur in the northeast, and Babylon in the southeast. The Hittite kingdom was an alliance of dozens of city-states. Although the great empire of Igut had conquered this place, the pharaohs of Igut allowed the Hittite people to worship their own guardian gods in order to better manage the place. They did not destroy the original temple, but at the same time, they ordered the people to worship Horus, the guardian god of Igut. Maria prayed in her room on the second floor. She prayed like this every morning after washing up, before lunch, and at night. She had been in Duk for 3 days now. She was so devout, respectful, and meticulous that even Gabriel, a well-trained Templar, could not help but praise her in his heart. He thought that she should meet the requirements of her adoratress and that the gods might pity her. In the territory of the empire of Igut, there were two vast fertile lands along the Nile River, called the Upper Igut and the Lower Igut. Gabriel was a warrior sent by the Temple of Isis to protect Maria in Montefiore, the capital of Igut. He answered the report and request of Roddik, the chief priest and governor of Igut. The Temple of Isis would send people to protect anyone who passed the test of the gods and was qualified to become the adoratress of Isis. When Maria was praying, Gabriel was standing downstairs at the gate of the courtyard. She had a heavy sword hanging on her waist. Both sides of the sword edge were inlaid with a parangan. Even in an environment where there was no danger, she still wore a silver armor meticulously. Her expression was solemn and solemn. From this position, she could see the green-gold dome of the Temple of Murin on the other side of the town. She pursed her lips, and there was an imperceptible sneer in her eyes. Obviously, the guardian warrior of the Temple of Isis did not like the god worshipped by the foreign races. However, the pharaohs of Igut had allowed the original temple to be preserved here, so she could not say anything. Her duty was only to protect Maria. She did not have to care about other people's business. Gabriel's figure was slender and tall, sexy and muscular. Her face had the obvious characteristics of a different race in the north. Her skin was fair, her nose was straight, and her eyes were a mesmerizing blue. Her golden curly hair was draped over the silver armor, and her temperament was so gentle and firm. She was young and beautiful, but the children in the town who were playing and throwing stones at each other unconsciously stayed far away from the courtyard. They did not dare to play at the gate. When people saw her, perhaps the first thing they noticed was not that she was a very beautiful woman. Around her, there was an invisible sense of self-confidence, pride, and majesty, as if it was full of power, without any restraint or concealment. Gabriel was the only guardian of the courtyard. The Temple of Isis had only sent her one warrior to protect Maria, one of the candidates for the adoratress. But Gabriel also knew that in the Temple of Horus in the town of Duk not far away, there were 60 fully armed elite soldiers of Rodrik stationed there. Obviously, this Lord Rodrik did not believe that she could protect Maria by herself. Although the desert between Igut and Hittite was full of danger, it was a bit exaggerated to bring so many elite soldiers with her. Lord Rodrik did not say anything out of the good manners of a noble, but Gabriel could sense his dissatisfaction. Gabriel did not care at all. It was not only because of her manners, but also because of her noble pride. On the other side of the town, in a small building near the Temple of Murin, Roddik was holding a glass of wine and looking at the courtyard where Gabriel was staying through the window. His brown eyes were deep, as if he was thinking about something. It seemed that this temple warrior from Memphis was not used to hiding her power and always made her aura public. This was not surprising, as one of her duties was to promote the dignity of the gods. But for a hereditary noble like Roddick, this was not a good habit. People always needed to hide something. They could not expose all of their power to potential enemies. They only showed their real power when the time was right. The fight for power and wealth was always cruel. People needed to be prepared at all times, show the right amount of deterrence, and leave a trump card for emergencies. The Temple of Murin was not far from the small building he was staying in. Lord Roderick did not think there was anything wrong with it. People on this continent worshipped all kinds of gods, big and small. Some were the gods in the legends, and some were the guardian gods that the local people thought of themselves. The pharaoh of the Empire of Igut claimed to be the human incarnation and spokesperson of Horus, the son of the gods, and the king of the gods who ruled the upper and lower Igut. The traditional guardian god of the lower Igut was the goddess Isis, the mother of Horus. Her main temple was located in Montefiore, the capital of the lower Igut. Almost every country on the continent was ruled by a combination of monarchy and theocracy. The monarch was known as the spokesperson of the gods. The Temple of Isis in Montefiore was the most important power center of the lower Igut. This time, the Temple of Isis only sent one warrior to protect the candidate of the Adoratress of Cape. Lord Roderick was obviously dissatisfied. He felt that he and the state he represented were being looked down upon. Cape was located on the northeast border of the Empire of Igut, the closest place to Babylon and the Hittite kingdom. Outside the border was a vast and desolate desert, which could not be compared with other rich and fertile city-states. Its geographical location was very important, but it did not bring all the benefits to Cape. Once there was a war, Cape would be the first to bear the brunt of it. In the seemingly peaceful era, it was an important port for trade with the northwest countries, full of countless opportunities. Now the Hittite kingdom had surrendered to the Igut, but Lord Roderick vaguely heard that many lords of the city-states of Hittite were not reconciled to the fate of being a vassal and always wanted to unite and rebel secretly. It just so happened that the Temple of Isis was selecting the Adoratress. Of course, Dick hoped that the Adoratress would come from Cape, which not only represented the glory of the city-state, but also the power of the Temple of Isis and the whole of the lower Igut to protect Cape in case of conflict in the future. Dick certainly did not want anything to happen to Maria, so he brought his most elite guards with him. Such a force was obviously superfluous to protect one person across the desert. Of course, Dick had his own plans. He had become the governor and chief priest of Cape at a young age, holding the power of the state and the state. In addition to his prominent status, of course, he also relied on his own talent to maximize the benefits of one thing. The Temple of Isis only sent one person, which was good for Dick. It saved him a lot of bribe. Seeing Gabriel, Dick had a feeling that this guardian of the Temple of Isis was different from many greedy priests. She was like a proud rooster who disdained to accept any bribes. And it seemed that she had no concept of wealth at all. Gabriel didn't seem to know how expensive the sword she was wearing was. She just hung it around her waist. If she was walking alone, the sword wouldn't be able to protect her. Instead, it would attract bandits. Even Roddick was surprised that Gabriel came to Cape from Montefiore alone with a sword. She was so lucky that she could arrive safely. Maybe it was because the bandits along the way knew who she was and did not dare to offend the Temple of Isis. In the name of protecting the Adoratress and serving Lord Gabriel, the caravan was, of course, packed with all kinds of supplies, mainly the most popular wine and food in Duk. With Lord Gabriel around, the checkpoints on the border between Egypt and Hittite would naturally pass without any inspection and, of course, without collecting any taxes. The parangons mined by the residents of Duk had to be handed over to the city in the form of taxes. The law of the city stipulated that 1 out of every 10 parangons belonged to the residents. That was the reward they deserved. At the same time, Roddick, of course, knew that Mayor Dusty, who had the power to levy taxes in Duk, would not be so selfless. He must have kept a lot of parangons in his hands. Parangons were a kind of currency, worth 20 times more than gold of the same weight. It was the same in Duk. But Duk was both rich and poor. Apart from parangons and iron, the barren land only had a small amount of barley to feed the people. All other necessities of life and enjoyment had to be transported from other places. The location of Duk was so remote that everything was many times more expensive to transport than in other places. The people of Duk might not know that they were probably the wealthiest people on the continent. At the same time, Duk was also the most expensive place on the continent. Although the taxes on the trade routes were very high, a successful trade could still be profitable. In order to provide cover for the goods he was transporting to Duk, Drick organized a caravan from Cape States to accompany his caravan. The merchants were naturally willing to follow Lord Drick's caravan. This was a guarantee of absolute safety, and the cost of mercenaries could be saved. Besides, with Lord Gabriel and Lord Drick around, the tax collectors at the checkpoints along the way would not try to extort money from them. The merchants were very grateful to Lord Drick, who was considerate to his people. Many nobles and officials would not take such good care of merchants. During dinner, Lord Drick and Mayor Dusty had a pleasant conversation. What was even more pleasant was the transaction between them. Both sides were very satisfied. In addition to the parangons, Lord Drick also bought precious fine iron from Mayor Dusty. This was smuggling, a secret that should not be revealed to outsiders. The two of them had a tacit understanding while enjoying the delicious food and wine. Although the transaction was pleasant, Roddick did not like this place, especially when it was filled with a smoky smell that made him very uncomfortable. He felt a little anxious. He did not know when he would have to wait. The reason why he brought Maria here was not only to do business with her, but also to obtain the god's tear. The high priests of the Temple of Isis had announced an oracle that a god's tear would be given to the human world, and the one who obtained it would be the adoratress of Isis. Roddick had his own ideas about this. The god's tear was nothing more than a more precious parangon. If it really appeared, it would most likely be in the place where the highest concentration of parangons was found. Taking advantage of the geographical location and waiting in Duk would be the best way to get the god's tear first. Of course, this was also a gamble, but it was a gamble that would be profitable no matter the outcome. If he succeeded, everything would be perfect. He told Maria that he received the guidance of Isis in his dream, and Maria told Gabriel about it, persuading him to cross the desert border to come to Duk. Maria had been praying devoutly every day since they arrived in Duk, but Roddick, who made up the lie, was getting impatient. In this small town, where blacksmith's furnaces were burning everywhere, Lord Drick could not stand the harsh environment. He did not want to stay another day. He could not help but think of the legend about the god's tear again. He was already a little drunk. He cursed in his mind, the god's mercy? Is it the will of the gods or a lie made up by the priests? When did this ancient oracle start to circulate? It's just a stone. No matter how precious it is, it's just a stone with some use. Instead of praying to the gods, it's better to ask the miners for help. Does the god's tear mean that she is the adoratress? Then who is the miner? Maybe he's a dirty old man. Just as he was thinking about this, a gust of warm wind blew in from outside the window. Dick shivered inexplicably and sobered up. He quickly pressed his hand on his chest and prayed, "Great goddess Isis, my thoughts are not disrespectful to you. They are just an honest expression." At this moment, Roddick suddenly froze. He seemed to have sensed something. It was a mysterious energy fluctuation, both mysterious and unfamiliar. The unpleasant heat of the furnace and the inexplicable chill seemed to have been soothed by something. He traced the source of the fluctuation to a house on the edge of the town. Roddick immediately put down his cup and shouted, "Come in, Judah. The god's tear may have appeared. Do as I say." Gabriel, who was standing solemnly, suddenly raised her head and looked in a certain direction of the town. She felt a mysterious and familiar fluctuation of power in the air, both subtle and clear. Her eyes flashed with an inexplicable light of relief as she looked back at Maria's window. Ding! A crisp sound was heard, followed by a faint buzzing sound that echoed in the room for a long time. Amon was holding a heavy hammer and smashing it on a fist-sized round stone that was shining with a dark light. The iron hammer looked so heavy, bringing with it a sharp sound of wind as it fell, but when it fell on the surface of the stone, it became as light as a feather, only emitting a crisp, dinged sound. Amon's posture of holding the hammer was a little funny. His hands were placed in front of him, and his entire upper arm was attached to the handle of the hammer. He was not too tall. After all, he was only 14 years old and had not yet fully grown into a man. However, the muscles all over his body were very strong and sturdy. When he swung the sledgehammer, there seemed to be little snakes slithering on his bulging muscles. According to the rules of Duk since ancient times, a child of his age was not qualified to mine parangons by himself. Using the unique hammering technique of Duk to crack open the core of the ore was the last and most crucial step to obtaining a parangon. But today he had to do it at home, because his father was drunk again. His hands were trembling and he could not control the hammer. Tomorrow, he had to hand over a parangon. It is recommended that you read the text according to the map, otherwise you may easily get dizzy. List of characters in this chapter. Eco Maria, the candidate of the adoratress from the state of Cape, Empire of Igut. She may become the adoratress of the Temple of Isis in Montefiore. The Empire of Igut is divided into the Upper Igut and the Lower Igut. Montefiore is the capital of the Lower Igut. Dusty, mayor of the town of Duk. The town is located on the border of the Hittite kingdom of Saya. The Hittite kingdom is a vassal state of Igut. Raddik, mayor of the kingdom of Igut and Cape states. Gabriel, guardian of the temple of Isis in Montefiore. Ammon, the son of a blacksmith in Duk. Background of the gods in this chapter. Horus, the main god and king worshipped by the people of Igut. The pharaohs of Igut are said to be the incarnation and spokesperson of Horus in the human world. Isis, the mother of Horus in the myths and legends, the patroness of the Lower Igut and the holy mother worshipped by the people of Igut. Murin, the goddess widely worshipped in the regions of Hittite, Assyria and Babylon. The patroness of the people of Duk since ancient times. Chapter 2. According to the decree of the city, 9 out of 10 parangons mined by every household in Duk had to be handed over to the city, and the remaining 1 belonged to the household. But the decree also stipulated that every household in Duk had to pay at least 1 parangon every season, which was the basic tax. All the adults in the town loved to drink, including the women in their prime. Mining or forging iron embryos required heavy physical labor. It was said that wine was a magical thing with some kind of mysterious power. It seemed to relax the mind and relieve physical fatigue, but drinking too much was not always a good thing. Ammon's father was addicted to wine, especially the fragrant and expensive wine. His hands had been trembling more and more violently in recent years. In addition to wine, the residents of Duk also loved all kinds of delicious meat. But except for the small flock of sheep they kept nearby and to the occasional game they hunted in the mountains, most of the meat had to be shipped in from other places. Ammon's father had exchanged his money for enjoyment, but he had not paid the parangon for the season's tax. Mayor Dusty, who was in charge of the tax collection and statistics of Duk, was usually a kind person. He did not push the miners too hard when they were in arrears. After all, mining parangons required not only hard work and skill, but also luck. Even if they were in arrears for a while, they could always pay up when they were lucky. Because of this, Mayor Dusty had been respected by the residents for a long time and lived a comfortable life. But 3 days ago, the mayor ordered that all the households in arrears must pay up within 3 days. All the households in the town had paid up within 3 days. Basically, everyone had a surplus for the rainy days, except for Ammon's family. The mayor's order might have something to do with the Honorable Lord Igut who came to the town 3 days ago. Ammon did not know the details, and it was not his place to ask. Ammon's father exchanged the last parangon he had for wine when the caravan first arrived in the town. When the mayor gave the order, he realized that he had not yet paid the tax for the season, so he went to borrow from Crazy Ol, Nietzsche, but all he got was a mined ore. Crazy Ol assured Ammon's father that there must be a parangon inside. Not all ores contained parangons, but parangons would only appear in such ores. His father's hands were trembling and he could not control the hammer, so he asked the 14-year-old Ammon to try. According to the rules of Duk since ancient times, when a man reached the age of 16, he would receive the blessing of God in the temple of Murin. Only then would he be qualified to learn the unique craftsmanship passed down from generation to generation. Only when he had mastered the craftsmanship could he open the ore and take out the parangons by himself. Those who were not qualified could only do some auxiliary work, such as searching for cores in the mountains and mining them, cutting trees to make charcoal to provide fuel for the furnace, and so on. In the past 2 years, Amon's father felt that his physical strength was weakening faster and faster, and his hands were trembling more and more violently. If he waited for the day to come, it would be too late for Amon to take over his mining hammer. Therefore, he secretly taught his son the local mining skills in advance. After 2 years of practice, Amon had mastered the skills quite well, which surprised his father. Generally speaking, if a Duk boy wanted to master this unique way of controlling the power, he would have to start learning at the age of 16, and he would not be able to master it until he was 20. His father was surprised, but Amon was even more surprised, not because he was a fast learner. Didn't the priests say that only with the blessing and approval of the patron could one learn the unique skills of Duk? He did not go through that solemn and sacred ceremony. How did he awaken the legendary power? He did not ask his father, but asked Crazy Ol Nietzsche. Crazy Ol snorted and did not answer. But he also told him to keep it a secret and not to talk about it. When Amon swung the hammer at the ore core, his father was very nervous, and his hands were trembling uncontrollably. But Amon was calm and focused. His father thought it was the first time he had done this, but he did not know that Amon had done the same thing many times in Crazy Ol's house. His father was not the only one who taught Amon in private. Crazy Ol also taught him. Crazy Ol often drank while watching Amon work for him. When the sledgehammer hit the ore core, not only did it control the force, but it also released a penetrating shockwave at the moment of contact. The shockwave entered the incomparably hard ore core, and the echoes of the shockwave lingered in the house for a long time. Then, countless fine cracks appeared on the surface of the ore core, which was harder than pig iron. The cracks continued to intertwine and spread, becoming densely packed. The ore core also gradually turned from a black color to a dull grayish-white. When the cracks spread to the extreme, the ore core naturally opened, or rather, scattered like fine sand. If one was lucky, a parangan would appear in the center of the gray sand. A parangan could not be taken out by brute force. It was very hard and could not be destroyed by ordinary force. But it was very fragile when it was still in the ore core. If one was not careful, it would turn into powder along with the ore core. All parangons were of the same shape and size, about the size of a cat's eye. It was a perfect dodecahedron. It had 30 sides, 20 corners, and 12 faces, each of which was a regular pentagon. It was said that in the far northwest of the continent, there was a sage named Tayate who once said that there were only 5 regular polyhedrons in the world, and the dodecahedron was the most special one. It was the outline of the world drawn by God, and it contained the mysterious information of the 5th element. It was the source and symbol of the mysterious power. The most common type of God's stone was colorless and transparent. Holding it in one's hand and looking at it from different angles, it would show various ever-changing pentagrams. It was so perfect, dazzling, and enchanting that it made people marvel at the wonders of the Creator. In addition to the colorless and transparent parangons, Amon knew that there were 4 other kinds of parangons. They were blue, red, black, and white. According to a distant sage, Empedocles, they symbolized the mysterious information of the 4 elements that made up the world: water, fire, earth, and air. Of course, Amon heard all this from Crazy Ol. He did not know whether it was true or not, nor did he know whether those so-called sages really existed. Maybe it was all made up by Crazy Ol. Crazy Ol Nietzsche had another unorthodox theory about parangons. He said that they were the crystallization of the bones of the fallen gods, and could be called the bones of the gods. Amon could not believe it. He once asked Crazy Ol, "Can the eternal gods also fall?" Crazy Ol asked him back. According to the legend, humans were created by the gods. Humans could die, so who created the gods? Why couldn't they fall? In the oldest legend, the area around Duk was the place where the gods fell in the ancient war. Crazy Ol also said that when he traveled the continent in his early years, he met a monk from the Far East who called parangons the Saraira of the earth. Amon did not understand what that meant. Crazy Ol's messy beard was stained with bright red wine when he said this. Then he winked at Ammon and said, "There are many legends about the gods in the continent. The earth is the body of the ancient gods. Is there anything wrong with parangons being the bones of the gods?" Ammon could only take it as the drunken talk of Crazy Ol. But he did not dare to say that it was impossible. So he stopped thinking about it and focused on what he was doing. This was his best habit. Although Ammon did not know what parangons were, he knew the types of parangons. The 4 special parangons were much rarer than the ordinary ones. The probability of them being mined was only 1 out of several hundred. Ammon did not know how valuable they were. All the special parangons that appeared in Duk were taken away by the state as important tributes. But tonight, when the ore core turned into gray sand and scattered on the anvil, Ammon was stunned. The heavy hammer froze in the air. His father, who was watching from the side, was also stunned. His eyes were wide open and his mouth was wide open, but he forgot to close it. His hand that was holding the wine cup was still trembling, but he didn't realize that the wine had splashed on his clothes. Amidst the grayish-white fine sand, there was a divine stone lying there quietly. It was pale gold and translucent. There seemed to be a strange luster flowing in it, as if it contained tears. What kind of parangan was this? When the parangan appeared, a mysterious wave rippled silently in the surroundings. Ammon was keenly aware of it, but he didn't pay much attention to it due to his surprise. His father, on the other hand, was completely stunned. Not long after, a polite voice outside the door brought the father and son back to reality. "Is anyone home? I am Fayal Judah, the clerk of Lord Roddick, governor of Cape State of the great empire of Igut. I am here on the order of Lord Dick." Following the voice, the person who spoke had already pushed open the door, walked through the house into the backyard, and arrived at the door of the workshop. His voice sounded cultured, but his behavior was casual. He walked in without the permission of the owner. 2 heavily armed soldiers stood guard outside the door, and another 2 followed behind him on both sides. When Ammon came to his senses and turned to look at the door, Fayal happened to have 1 foot over the threshold. He looked shocked and ecstatic. Fayal was in his 30s. He was of medium height, brown skin, curly hair, and wore a linen robe. He was very clean. His lips were a little thin, and his eyes were a little narrow. He always had a thoughtful look. Only in front of honorable men like Roddick would he show such a look of concentration. But now, all he could see was the parangan shining with pale gold luster. Thank the great goddess Isis. Thank the gods for their mercy. May the light of God always shine on Igut and protect Cape States forever. While Ammon was puzzled, Fayal had already stepped over the threshold. He put 1 hand on his forehead and the other on the ground as he knelt on 1 knee. The 2 soldiers outside the door also knelt on 1 knee with Lord Fayal. They put their swords on the ground, and their armor clanged against each other. "For you, how can you come in like this?" Ammon asked hesitantly. Ammon's father had already put down his glass and stood up. He asked in a trembling voice, "Honorable sir, what kind of parangan is this? Why have I never seen it before? Great goddess Isis, please forgive this ignorant voice." Hearing the father and son, Fayal put down his hand on his forehead and raised his head in an exaggerated exclamation. When he saw that Ammon and his son were still standing there, he shouted angrily, "Kneel." Fayal had already knelt, but these people were still standing there. It looked as if Fayal was kneeling before them. How could they not be angry? Ammon's father's lips moved, but he did not dare to say anything. He did not know whether he should kneel to the parangan on the anvil or to the honorable sir in front of the door. He thought for a moment, then knelt before Fayal. Ammon gently put the sledgehammer down beside the anvil and said as calmly as he could, "When you mine a parangan, you have to stand to swing the hammer. Otherwise, how can you see it being taken out in one piece?" Then he copied Fayal's posture and knelt before the parangan in front of him. He had realized that the parangan they had mined today was extraordinary, and these people had come for it. When the father and son knelt, Fayal had already stood up. He had seen clearly that it was the child who had mined the god's tear. When Fayal came in, Ammon had not put down the hammer in his hand. The sloppy old drunkard's hands were trembling. Obviously, he was not the one who had mined the parangan. My child, you have received the blessing of the goddess Isis and are lucky enough to welcome the god's tear to the world. What is your name? Asked Fayal, looking at Aman. Aman realized that this parangan was called the god's tear. It seemed that Crazy Ol was not completely wrong when he said that the parangan was the remains of the gods. He answered respectfully, my name is Aman. People here call me Aman. Aman had a full name, Allahamin Sumisaya Hova Anriyi Montman. But it was his father who had given him this name, and only his father had mentioned it when he was a child. Even Aman himself did not remember it clearly. People in the town just called him Aman. His father had crossed the line by giving him such a name. Only a noble could have such a long list of names and write them out. It represented hereditary glory. Aman was neither a slave nor a noble. He was just an ordinary citizen of Duk. Giving him such a name was just a self-consolation for his drunkard father's illusionary glory. The long list of titles was not his family's lineage. His father made them up when he was drunk, so even Aman himself wouldn't mention them. Fayal looked at Aman and nodded with satisfaction. His expression became solemn. My name is Fayal Judah. I come from the empire of Igut, Cape States, which rules the Hittite kingdom. I am the chief clerk of Lord Drick. Lord Drick received a prophecy from the great goddess Isis in his dream. The adoratress of the temple of Isis was blessed by the gods and bestowed with a god's tear. This is the place where the god's tear will descend. Fayal cleared his throat and looked at Aman. He did not see any reaction from the boy. Perhaps he was already in a daze. He cleared his throat and continued, Aman, under the benevolent gaze of Isis, you are fortunate enough to receive the god's tear. Thank you for your gift. It will belong to the adoratress of Isis. The goddess will remember your name. These are bestowed upon you by the generous Lord Roddick. Fayal took out a bag and put it on the anvil. He picked up the god's tear and put it in a golden box he carried with him. Then he turned and walked out. Aman's father saw him. He wanted to stop him but did not dare to make a sound. When Aman stood up, Fayal was already gone. Two warriors followed closely behind him to protect him. The hilts of their swords clanged against their armor. Aman realized that it was useless to chase after him. The strange parangan, which he had never seen before, was taken away by the uninvited guest as soon as it was mined, leaving only a bag of money. But the man said thank you for your gift, as if Aman had voluntarily given him the parangan. Aman was angry and unwilling. He remembered that his father still had to pay the parangan tomorrow. The strange parangan could have been used to complete the task, but now it had been taken away. Then he remembered that the parangan was taken away by Lord Drick. If the mayor wanted to pursue the matter, he should go to Lord Drick. Their family had paid their taxes. Many thoughts flashed through his mind. But one thing that did not occur to Aman was that Fayal's action would reveal the fact that he had learned the Duk mining skills without permission. Chapter 3. Judah was in a good mood. Rodrick rewarded the craftsman with 30 gold coins, each of which weighed 1 baht. They were heavy in a bag. And what he put on the boy's anvil were 30 silver coins about the same size as gold coins, but each of them weighed only half a baht, and were worth only 1.5 gold coins. The rest were all his. But Lord Jewel was not afraid that Rodrick would reproach him. The noble Lord Dick would not deign to stand in front of the fire in this dirty and humble miner's house. It was a great honor for the family to have sent him, the clerk. He had done what Lord Dick had told him to do and was lucky enough to get the god's tear. Lord Dick would only be pleasantly surprised and would even reward him. He wouldn't pursue such trivial matters. He knew Lord Dick too well. This was the first time Judah had seen the god's tear. He had never even heard of it before. Roddick told him that it looked like a pale gold, translucent parangan. He saw it in Aman's house and got it. The house reeked of wine and the fire. Judah did not want to stay a moment longer. He left as soon as he got the god's tear. Judah was very curious about the legendary symbol of the god's mercy. He almost wanted to hold it in his hand and see what was so special about it. He even wanted to put it in his purse, but he dared not. He could only respectfully and carefully hold the golden box that contained the god's tear. Judah left. After a while, Aman also left. He went to see Crazy Ol. Aman was still a boy. He felt wronged, but he could not say anything to his drunk father. Listening to Crazy Ole's rambling was a way to relax and comfort him. He stayed in Crazy Ole's house for about an hour. Then he quietly went to the west side of the town. To the west of the town of Duk, there was a stretch of hills covered with strange black rocks. Closer to the hills, there were a few grassy slopes where a small number of sheep could be grazed. Farther away, it became more dangerous. The strange rocks were not tall, but they were strange, like a dense forest of demons. The shrubs growing on them looked like messy human hair. The shrubs were no taller than 2 people, but their branches were very hard. They had to be cut down with good knives and axes. The charcoal made from the shrubs was the best fuel for smelting iron. This area was called the charcoal forest. It was on the road from Duk to Saya. Saya's post road also passed through this forest. Except for the post roads that were guarded by soldiers of the city every 30 miles, people rarely entered the depths of the charcoal forest. The strange and complex shrubs and rocks could completely block the view within a short distance, and it looked as if it was full of mysterious dangers. But Crazy Ole told Amon that there was a cold spring somewhere in the charcoal forest. The water was piercingly cold, but it could cleanse and purify one's body. Bathing in the cold spring all year round could make one's body stronger and more responsive. But one had to bathe according to the method Crazy Ole taught Amon. Otherwise, the cold would invade one's body and leave a hidden disease. Once the disease broke out, it would be fatal. Whether or not he could learn it without harming his body, and whether or not he could endure the bone-piercing cold, it all depended on him. Amon once asked Crazy Ole what other benefits there were to bathe in the cold spring. Crazy Ole answered with a smile, "Sober up." Amon wanted to take his drunkard father to the cold spring, but Crazy Ole glared at him. "Do you want to kill your father? He can't bear it. Only you can go. Don't tell anyone." So Amon went to the bath alone. Every time he went to the bath, it was in the middle of the night under the bright moonlight. At first, he couldn't stand the freezing cold, but every time he sat by the spring after his bath, he would feel a warm current flowing through his body, making him feel so comfortable that he wanted to moan. Amon liked the feeling. Every time he was in a bad mood, he would come to the cold spring. And there was another special feature of the cold spring. Although it was extremely cold, it could wash people very clean. Not even a speck of dust would be left on their bodies. Roddick was very excited and even ecstatic. He had successfully obtained the god's tear. How wise and lucky he was. Surrounded by the praises of his subordinates and servants, he felt a little complacent with the wine glass in his hand. Roddick didn't have the dream where Isis guided him. He made it up. But now, he couldn't help but believe that he was really guided and favored by goddess Isis. The first thing he did when he got the god's tear was to kneel down and pray, praising the great goddess. Then he rewarded Judah with 3 parangons and sent a generous gift to Mayor Dusty. Mayor Dusty must have known why he had to give such a heavy gift to express his gratitude. Judah did as he was told. When the god's tear first appeared, he took it away on the spot in the name of offering it to goddess Isis. This would save him a lot of trouble. Once such an important thing was extracted, it would be very difficult to get it back if it was handed over to Saya according to the local rules. Although Dick might get it with the right threats, there was no guarantee that he would get it. Of course, there were people in the Hittite kingdom who wanted the god's tear. Even in the empire of Igut, Iko Maria was not the only candidate for the adoratress. It was a competition of interests. But how could the lowly miner who mined the god's tear reject Roderick's noble will and offer it to the goddess Isis? Everything seemed to be logical. As for Mayor Dusty, Roddick would certainly make it up to him. He could not afford to lose this friend in the future. As for who the miner was and what did he get? What was even funnier was that since the construction of the Temple of Horus, in order to save manpower and centralize power, Mayor Dusty was still the high priest of the temple. The priest and clerk who presided over the affairs of the Temple of Horus was still Shog. Mayor Dusty changed into a luxurious coat and was the last to arrive at the square in front of the Temple of Murin with his servants. People had already formed a large circle. Amon and his father stood at the front of the crowd with their heads bowed. Shog was facing the crowd on the high steps of the temple. The crowd made way for Dusty. As he walked, he shouted unhappily, "Shog, why did you ring the bell so early in the morning? Lord Dick is still in town. Aren't you afraid of disturbing the honorable guest?" Shog hurried down the steps and bowed to Dusty. "Dear Oracle, my lord, someone has blasphemed our patron, the great Moorin." Then he lowered his voice and said, "Mayor, you still don't know. Someone in town has mined a legendary god's tear, but he didn't hand it in. Instead, he offered it to Lord Roddick. You know, even if it's a tribute, it should be you or me." Dusty quickly interrupted him in a low voice. "Shog, don't mention it. Lord Dick wants the god's tear. He's in town. Can you or I stop him? But we didn't hand it in as the rule. If someone comes after us, who will be responsible? The miners who mined it voluntarily offered it to the goddess Isis, and Lord Dick is the witness. It saves us a lot of trouble. Don't worry, Lord Dick's gift will be delivered to your house tonight. You won't be disappointed. Anything else?" Shog was stunned for a second, then he nodded humbly. "Got it. We'll do as you say. But there's one more thing we have to deal with. Someone has violated the dignity of the goddess." The people in the square only saw Shog and Lord Dusty whispering to each other. Then Shog turned around and raised his voice. "Amon, the miner's son, violated the oracle of Duk. He opened the mine and took out a parangan without Moorin's permission and blessing. I verified it last night. His father admitted it himself. Lord Dusty is here. What do you think we should do with him?" Dusty frowned but didn't say anything. He could only pretend to be dignified. He was disgusted by Shog's actions, but he couldn't do anything to stop it. When it came to blasphemy, everyone had to be careful. He couldn't let Shog get anything on him. Besides, this was indeed the rule of Duk. It was related to the dignity of the patron. He thought to himself, what is this Shog trying to do with this? Is he after me? Shog looked at Amon like a cold eagle looking at a trembling rabbit. Amon bit his lips and didn't tremble. He didn't like this kid for a long time. Duk produced an endless supply of parangons, which symbolized endless wealth. But there were only 4 people in this town who could write: Dusty, Shog, Crazy, Ol Nietzsche, and Amon. Dusty could only write on clay tablets used in Hittite, Babylon, and Assur. This kind of writing was first carved on clay tablets with a knife. Shog, on the other hand, knew 2 kinds of writing. Apart from the knife script, he also knew the pen script used in the Empire of Igut, which was written on papyrus with a pen. These were all taught to him by Crazy Ol. But now, Crazy Ol also taught these 2 kinds of writing to Amon. Chapter 4. No one knew why Crazy Ol knew these 2 languages. He was the oldest person here. He had lived here before anyone was born. It was said that he had traveled all over the continent when he was young. No one knew exactly how old he was, but he should be at least 100 years old. In this age where people died young, longevity itself was an admirable miracle. It was seen as a gift from God. After becoming a priest, Shog had the opportunity to learn another way to write these 2 languages. It was called the Holy Book, which was usually only used when praising God. Except for nobles and priests, ordinary people could not learn it. The Holy Book was basically the same as an ordinary language, but it had a special and strict writing style. People who had never learned it could not understand it easily. It was said that it had a mysterious power that could communicate with the gods. In the eyes of civilians and slaves, any language was mysterious and represented some kind of awe-inspiring symbol or message. Duk needed a clerk, and so did the shrines. Here, Shog was the only one in charge. But things had changed in the last 2 years. Crazy Ol taught Amon how to write these 2 languages. When he was drunk, he told the mayor, "There are actually 3 clerical positions in our town. Unfortunately, there are too few people who know how to write. It's not suitable for the shrines of Moorin and Horus to have one person as a priest, let alone a clerk at the same time. Amon is a child blessed by God. He has learned how to write, both with a sword and with a pen. I can guarantee that he will be the best clerk in the future, and also an excellent priest." What displeased Shog the most was that Mayor Dusty did not object at that time. He even said with a smile, "Oh, then Amon is really a child blessed by God. When he grows up, he will be an excellent clerk." Shog felt as if he was bitten by a poisonous snake. Every time he thought that one day his power and wealth would be taken away by the son of a dirty drunkard, he could not sleep well. Today, there was another more important reason why he wanted to punish Amon in public. It made his teeth itch. The legend of the god's tear was not unique to the empire of Igut. In a faraway city, a noble lord had secretly sent him a message to pay attention to the parangons produced in Duk. If he could get the god's tear, he would be rewarded handsomely. All the parangons produced in Duk were registered by Shog, which was the most convenient condition. The god's tear had really appeared, but he was too late to get it. Even if he wanted to get it, he couldn't compete with Roddik for it. This Lord Drick was really something. He actually happened to be waiting in Duk at this time. Who would have thought that? When the god's tear came last night, Shog sensed it too. He rushed to Amon's house and saw two heavily armed warriors guarding the door. Then he saw Lord Drick's clerk coming out of the house with a golden box in his hand and two other warriors. By the time Shog entered the house, Amon had already left the backyard. There was only one drunkard in the house. Under Shog's questioning, it was easy for him to find out what had just happened. Shog could not and did not dare to question Roddik. But how could he let go of Amon? So early in the morning he rang the bell in the shrine of Murin to summon the residents. Mayor Dusty did not let him mention the god's tear, but he mentioned something else. It was a disaster for Amon. The residents were stunned for a moment, then whispered to each other. Amon had indeed disobeyed the ancient oracle, but it had never happened in Duk before. It took a lot of physical strength to learn the skills passed down from generation to generation. It was almost impossible for a child to learn it at such a young age. Even if something like this had happened in history, no one would say anything about it. Mining parangons was so difficult. It was not a bad thing to have a qualified miner. As long as the miner did not say anything, no one would pursue the issue. But in front of the shrine of Murin, under the solemn gaze of the goddess, the problem was serious. No one could defend Amon. Otherwise, it would be disrespectful to the goddess. The oracle was equal to the decree. Seeing that no one spoke loudly, Shog cleared his throat again and said loudly, "Mercy is a virtue, but piety and obedience to the goddess is a virtue even more. Amon, are you ready to accept the punishment of the goddess? In the name of Murin, how should we punish this child as mercifully as possible?" His last sentence was directed at everyone. Dusty furrowed his brows again, looking very displeased. Shog, on the other hand, seemed prepared. A voice from the crowd shouted, "According to the oracle, cut off one of his fingers. The merciful Lord Priest can decide which finger to cut off." Amon's body trembled. His face was pale, and the corner of his mouth was twitching. He clenched his teeth and said nothing. His father knelt down and begged in a trembling voice, "Please forgive Amon. He's still a child. He doesn't know what he's doing. I'm the one who taught him. I'm the one who disobeyed the oracle. I should be the one to be punished." Many people in the crowd echoed in a low voice, "Yes, Lord Shog, please forgive that ignorant child. As atonement, let him mine more parangons and offer them to the goddess." Shog did not seem to hear these voices. He raised his hands to calm the crowd down. Then he looked at Amon in a calm and indifferent tone and asked, "Amon, did you understand the oracle of the patron when you were learning the mining skills? Although you are a child, as a resident of Duk, you should have understood it since you were a child." As he spoke, he thought to himself, "Which finger of Amon should I cut off?" Mayor Dusty coughed softly. He felt that he should say something. But at this moment, a voice from outside the crowd shouted, "Whose ignorance is it? Priest, you have forgotten the oracle. This lucky child did not violate it." Everyone was startled. Shog looked up and saw a young man walking through the crowd. He was in his early 20s, wearing a clean white robe and a crown of fresh twigs on his head. Shog had seen this man before. He was not a resident of Duk. He came here with Roddik a few days ago. He was one of Lord Drick's most respected advisors. It was said that he was a wandering sage from far away on the continent. His name was Aristotle. Mayor Dusty asked, "Mr. Aristotle, what brings you here? What is Lord Drick's order?" Aristotle smiled and nodded, "I'm here to do something for Lord Drick." I happen to see what happened to this child. May I ask this priest a few questions, dear Mayor? Dusty nodded politely. Go ahead, Mr. Aristotle. Shog was puzzled. He did not know what this young man wanted to ask him. He did not know why this man was defending Amon and how. Aristotle nodded to the mayor with a smile, then turned to Shog and asked calmly, Lord Priest, in the name of the goddess in the temple behind you, answer me seriously. According to the oracle passed down from generation to generation, only with the approval and blessing of the guardian goddess can one learn the unique mining skills of this place. Am I right? Shog nodded solemnly. Yes, sir. I answer you in the name of the goddess. It is absolutely true. Aristotle nodded again and asked, This child has learned the skill you mentioned. Is it true? Shog nodded subconsciously. Yes, it is true. Aristotle did not wait for him to say more. He continued loudly, Then this child has received the approval and blessing of the goddess, hasn't he? Shog was a little confused. He retorted loudly, No, he has violated the oracle. That's why he has to be punished. Aristotle snorted coldly and still retorted loudly, No, the one who has forgotten the true spirit of the oracle is you, Lord Priest. Only with the approval and blessing of the goddess can one learn this skill. This is the oracle. Without the approval and blessing of the goddess, one cannot learn it. But this child has learned it. This is enough to prove that he has the approval and blessing of the goddess. If you want to deny this, Lord Priest, you are denying the oracle. This time, not only Shog was confused, but all the onlookers were also confused. The miners of Duk had been working with sledgehammers and stoves for generations. How could they have seen the debating skills of a sage from the distant continent? Shog was speechless. He did not know how to answer. Some people said that the shrine was the most unreasonable place, because the oracle was the law and could not be refuted. But at the same time, under the gaze of the gods, it was also the most important place to be reasonable. One had to be respectful and careful. Every word had to express faith and respect for the gods. Aristotle saw the puzzled faces of the onlookers. He smiled and raised his hand to point at Shog. He said, All men have life and death. This is the will of God. This is the major premise. Obviously, he is a man. This is the minor premise. So he will die. This is the conclusion. Don't you understand? Then he pointed at Amon and said, Only with the approval and blessing of the goddess can one learn the skill you mentioned. This is the oracle. This is the major premise. Obviously, this child has learned the skill. This is the minor premise. So he has already received the approval and blessing of the goddess. This is the conclusion. Is there anything wrong with it? Do you understand? With such an explanation, it was very easy to understand. Many people showed an expression of sudden realization and nodded their heads one after another. Some were even more confused. They felt that there was something wrong with Aristotle's words, but they could not tell what it was. Shog's face gradually turned the color of pig liver. Mayor Dusty's expression was a bit funny. He seemed to want to laugh but was holding it back. But he has not experienced the ceremony of approval and blessing of the gods. This is against the rules. Shog finally shouted out, but there was a trace of weakness in his voice. No, Amon has received the approval and blessing of Murin. The one who is detested and warned by the goddess is the priest of this town, Lord Shog. This I can prove. As he spoke, Crazy Ol waved his staff in front of him and walked to the front of the crowd. Crazy Ol was very old. His hair and beard were gray and messy. He walked unsteadily, but he did not look weak. Instead, he looked like a child learning to walk. His staff was dark brown with messy golden stripes. He did not lean on the ground to support his body, but waved it in his hand. Nietzsche passed by Aristotle and looked back at the young sage with a complicated look of admiration, scrutiny, and interrogation. Then he turned to stand in front of Shog, side by side with Amon. He pointed with his staff and said, 3 years ago, I received an oracle from Murin in a dream. She blessed Amon and allowed him to learn the skills of Duk. This child's skill was not taught by his father, but by me. Shog took a step back and asked, How can you prove it? Crazy Ol laughed and pointed at Shog's nose with his staff. Lord Priest, what has blinded your soul? Please pray and repent before the goddess, because God has proved it. Didn't you hear what this gentleman said? Chapter 5. For a moment, the square was silent. Crazy Ol concluded what Aristotle had said. God has proved that Amon has been blessed and approved. Mastering the craft is a miracle. It was hard to refute, unless someone stood up and shouted, the craftsmanship of Duk has been passed down from generation to generation. It doesn't need the blessing of the patron. But who dared to say that? Everyone here had believed in the protection of God for so many years, and it had been implanted in their souls. Even if there were some who doubted it, they could only confess in their bewilderment, because once they said it out loud, they would be abandoned by everyone around them. So it was not a question of whether they were willing to believe in God or not. They had to show their piety, and it was also a way to protect themselves. Seeing that no one spoke, Crazy Ol turned to Aristotle and said, "Sir, your argument just now contained many dangerous assumptions. I wonder if you are aware of them?" Aristotle looked into Nietzsche's eyes, and saw that there was a hint of a mocking sneer in the old man's eyes. Only Aristotle himself knew that if his syllogism had been changed to a different premise, it would indeed have led to a dangerous conclusion. For example, the child did not have the blessing of the patron, but he had learned the craft of mining. That meant that he did not need the blessing of the patron. The onlookers felt that something was wrong, but they could not point out what was wrong. No one dared to deny the oracle, because it was the starting point of everything. It had to be the premise. But when Crazy Ol asked Aristotle, it was obvious that he was hinting at something. Amon, who had been standing stubbornly, trembled again. He looked at Aristotle with gratitude, and then at Crazy Ol in confusion. Different from the others, Amon also understood Crazy Ol's implication. Nietzsche was not only questioning Aristotle, but also hinting at something. Amon's mind was no less turbulent than when he was interrogated by Shog. Many thoughts flashed through his mind. This debate contained many unbelievable and unspeakable assumptions, such as that Murin did not exist, that Murin existed but did not pay attention to this place, that learning the craft of mining did not require the blessing of the patron, and that blessing could come from another deity, and so on. Amon blushed as if he was drunk. He looked a little absent-minded. For a miner's son, it was hard to digest so many thoughts in a split second. But today he was the one involved in this matter, so he had to think about it. Aristotle seemed to understand Nietzsche's sneer. He put his hand on his chest and smiled. "I did not disrespect any deity. Devotion to the deities comes from our hearts, not from our desires. People should be devout in their beliefs, but the existence of the deities cannot be changed by someone's will." He cleverly avoided the interrogation. Crazy Ol did not continue to pester him. He turned around and said coldly to Shog, "There is only one explanation for this. Priest, your behavior is detrimental to the glory of Murin. The goddess did not bless Amon through you. We all know that the glory of the goddess is eternal, but the loyalty of priests must be tested. Mayor, what do you think? Since everyone is here, how should we deal with this priest?" Shog's face turned pale. Cold sweat trickled down from his forehead, and his legs trembled. He never thought that the situation would take such a turn. He was the one being interrogated. Crazy Ol was questioning whether he was still qualified to be a priest. From the look in Crazy Ol's eyes, he clearly read one word: coldness. But Mayor Dusty did not say a word. He just watched the scene with cold eyes. Shog had been in the high position in Duk for too long. He had gradually forgotten how he got his position in the first place. It was all thanks to Crazy Ol's help. Crazy Ol once said, "You are a straightforward man and very smart. More importantly, you are very real in the secular world. There is no one more suitable than you to be the priest and clerk of the shrine." However, Shog had been in this position for a long time. He had gradually made friends with the nobles in the city, and even had a secret ambition for the position of Mayor Dusty. However, he had neglected Crazy Ol, who had not shown himself for many years. Crazy Ol was so sharp when he was not talking nonsense. Was he trying to ruin his future in front of everyone? Just like how he helped him get this position in the first place? Shog took a step back and said loudly, "Oh, Mr. Nietzsche, it seems that this is all a misunderstanding. I didn't know that you had received the oracle of the great Murin in your dream. This is rare, but it has happened before. According to the records, before there was a shrine in Duk, it was Murin who directly blessed the earliest craftsmen in the town and taught us the skills that have been passed down from generation to generation. Amon, he is a child blessed by the goddess. Shog hurriedly threw out the records in the book. This was also an ancient legend of Duk, explaining the origin of the craftsman's skills. Later, people built the magnificent shrine according to this legend. But that was many, many years ago. It was not important to punish Amon now. Shog's first priority was to protect himself. Mayor Dusty finally spoke. He nodded with a faint smile. Yes, there is such a record in the book. Mr. Aristotle, you just said that you are here to do something for Lord Roderick. What is it? Don't let our quarrel delay you. The mayor obviously wanted to interrupt. Aristotle answered, Miss Maria, no, Lord Maria is not well, and her servant happens to be ill. We need to find a servant to serve Lord Maria. The servant must be able to do heavy work. It will take about 3 days. Dusty was a little puzzled. He wondered why Roddick needed a servant in town when he had so many attendants. But he was very tactful and didn't say anything more. He asked gently, What kind of person are you looking for? Aristotle glanced at Amon carelessly and said slowly, First, it can't be a woman who has had a man. Second, it can't be an adult man. Third, it can't have dust in his hair or mud under his nails. Fourth, it must have a pure heart. Fifth, it must be approved by the goddess Isis. As soon as Aristotle finished, Crazy Ole added 2 more conditions. He seemed to be very talkative today. Aristotle was slightly startled, then nodded with a bitter smile. Yes, and these 2 conditions. Is there such a person in town? If there is, the reward is 1 gold coin a day. Lord Roderick's generosity is admirable. Dusty understood immediately. If Maria's servant was ill, it would be very difficult to find such a person in Lord Roderick's entourage. These were actually the requirements of Gabriel. When she got the god's tear, she asked Maria to live according to the standards of her adoratress, because she would soon become a real adoratress. Gabriel had put forward 5 conditions, but Aristotle only mentioned the first 3. For the residents of Duk, the last 2 conditions did not make any difference. But Crazy Ole casually filled in the gaps. The residents of Duk usually dealt with furnaces and ores. In the past few days, the mayor had ordered to pay all the overdue taxes for the season. A large number of caravans had come to Duk. The furnaces of every household were still working, either to pay taxes or to mine parangons in exchange for more goods and time. It was very difficult to find a person with no dust in his hair or mud under his nails. There were only 3 in the square, Dusty, Shog, and Amon. Amon was very clean. He had just taken a bath in the cold spring last night. He washed his clothes and dried them in the morning sun. Then he put on his clothes and returned to the town. Crazy Ole smiled. How lucky! There is only one person here who meets your requirements. He is a child, not yet an adult. And you know why he is standing here. It is because of the blessing of the goddess Isis. Amon, you should go with this gentleman. Sir, please pay the 3 gold pieces to his father. The mayor also walked down the steps. He patted Amon's shoulder and said, Boy, go with this gentleman. Do everything he says. Don't neglect the most distinguished guest of the town. The crowd parted to make a path. Aristotle left with Amon. Before Amon left, he helped his father up from the ground. Crazy Ole whispered in his ear, Don't worry. Nothing bad will happen. You don't have to worry about this place anymore. The crowd did not disperse after Amon left. Crazy Ole was still standing in front of the crowd. He said to the mayor, The priest of the shrine used the ancient book to prove that Amon did not do anything wrong. He was blessed by Murin. But it also proved that the priest had forgotten the words of the book and was blinded. If not for our distinguished guest's reminder, Lord Shog would have cut off one of his fingers. Mayor, Mr. High Priest, how should we deal with this? Shog broke out in cold sweat again. He didn't expect Crazy Ole to be so ruthless today. If he didn't let go of the question and the priests in the main shrine heard about it, he wouldn't feel good. Shog stepped forward in a pleading voice and said, It's my fault. I've never encountered such a thing since I became a priest. Thank you, Mr. Nietzsche, for your reminder. I'm willing to atone for my reckless behavior and apologize to Amon. The noble priest also walked down the steps. He stooped down and patted the dust off Amon's father's knee. The townspeople's eyes widened. Amon's father trembled in fear. He took 2 steps back and said, Lord Shog, you don't have to do this. What should we do is the goddess order. I believe that the great Murin is protecting Amon. Crazy Ol sneered, you can't refuse the kindness of such a noble priest. He is so kind and generous. He wants to make it up to you, and you must accept it. Mayor, I suggest that Lord Shog pay the tax for the family this year. Shog stood up straight and nodded. Okay, no problem. His tone was generous because the old drunkard mined the least parangons in the town. Usually, it was only 4 parangons for the basic tax. But then he frowned. It occurred to him that the old drunkard was not the only one who could mine parangons. Amon was obviously a good one. If they mined a lot of parangons in the coming year, he would have to pay 9 parangons for every 10 parangons. That would be a huge expense. But under such circumstances, Shog had no choice but to agree. Mayor Dusty nodded, then it's over. I'll record what happened in the name of the mayor. But it's just a record. I won't report it as a blasphemy incident to the shrine of the city. Well, it's all over now. You can go now. Mayor Dusty wanted to make a record. He stated that he would not report it, but the implication was that he could report it. Shog, as a priest of the temple, had disobeyed the oracle, and there were witnesses to the incident. Mayor Dusty also vaguely knew that Shog had been trying to make friends with the lords of the city in the past 2 years. He wanted to take over the mayor's position. But now was not the time to fall out with him. After all, he could not find a better person to help him deal with the town's affairs. It was better to give him a proper warning. Chapter 6. Was Maria really sick? It looked like it, but only Gabriel knew what was going on. She wasn't really sick. But now, Maria really needed to stay in Duk for a few more days. On the night she got the god's tear, Maria fainted. The pious prayers of the past few days had consumed a great deal of energy and stamina. The environment in Duk made Lord Drick feel very uncomfortable. Maria was also a little uncomfortable. Apart from eating and sleeping, she had been focusing all her energy on praying to the goddess. Once she relaxed, she fainted or fell asleep, which was very common for ordinary people. Maria originally had a maid who did rough work and a personal maid by her side, but both of them had fallen ill in the past 2 days. Perhaps it was because of the long journey through the desert and then coming to this uncomfortable place. It was indeed uncomfortable, and the climate and environment were not very suitable for them. Lord Drick brought a few maids and slaves for Maria, but Gabriel didn't think they could directly serve the adoratress. Gabriel said to Drick, "You firmly believe that Maria will become the adoratress of the temple of Isis. She has already got the god's tear, so you must treat her like the adoratress." The temple of Isis had a large area of farmland and countless slaves, but the adoratress' position was superior. She could not use anything directly from the slaves, so the slaves could not serve her directly. She was not allowed to have any physical contact with adult men. Her clothes and food could not be served by women who had slept with men. The young and beautiful maids sent by Lord Drick were obviously not suitable. Rod Drick had considered everything very carefully, but he had neglected these things. It was not that he was not meticulous enough. According to the rules, only after the formal ceremony in the temple of Isis could the adoratress be recognized as the real adoratress. Gabriel, on the other hand, was very meticulous in treating the adoratress according to the rules. He was afraid that something might go wrong on the way back to the temple of Isis. At least it meant that the emissary of the temple had recognized Maria as the adoratress. Maria was not really sick. Gabriel's duty was to protect her, so her health was also guaranteed. When Maria woke up, Gabriel had treated her with simple prayers. There was nothing wrong with her body. Under Gabriel's protection, she could cross the desert safely. But Gabriel had other things to do, so he didn't even tell Roddick. He was going to teach Maria the most basic magic of the temple of Isis, the god's test. The standard of choosing a adoratress was not only to get the god's tear, but also to awaken the power bestowed by God. That was what Gabriel wanted to teach Maria. The process was usually very difficult, but with the God's tear, it could be much easier. This was one of the reasons why the God's tear was so precious. Only by awakening the power bestowed by God and passing the most basic God's test could Maria prove that she could use the God's tear to bless the people who were loyal to the temple. Maria had already got the God's tear. If she could do this before she reached the temple of Isis, she would naturally become the real adoratress. If she couldn't do it, there might be more twists and turns in the matter. Gabriel escorted Maria all the way to Duk and witnessed the appearance of the God's tear and Maria's piety. He was convinced of her identity as the adoratress, so he decided to do this as soon as possible. This was not against the will of God. When Maria arrived at the temple of Isis, the priests would teach her magic according to the procedure and test her within the specified time. Gabriel simply brought forward the ceremony and gave her special treatment. Lord Roderick was also worried that the priests of the shrine would not teach Maria the real magic or deliberately delay the teaching, so that she could not pass the examination, and so the candidates of the adoratress from other cities would have the opportunity to steal the position. Lord Roderick was thinking about how to carry out public gifts and private bribes. Gabriel did not say anything. He had solved the problem that worried Roderick. The rest was up to Maria. After all, he had protected Maria all the way here and got the God's tear. Even Gabriel felt lucky. This was the gift of goddess Isis. She had an indescribable sense of kinship with this pure and pious girl and was willing to help her. The magic Gabriel taught Maria was still a kind of prayer, but it required sincere faith and a calm heart. A special ceremony was used to awaken the strange power given by the gods and pass the gods' test. Maria asked her, "How will the gods test me?" Gabriel, who was always serious, showed a rare smile. "Pray to the gods' tear. According to the method I taught you, you will get the strange power given by the gods, but at the same time, you will be awakened the desire hidden in people's souls. You have to learn how to face these desires and not be influenced by them. This is the gods' test, the threshold to enter the temple of magic. Your heart is so sincere and pure, it is not difficult to pass the test. As a saintess, I don't need to say more about what you should expect of yourself." Maria asked hesitantly, "Do I have to get to the temple of Isis and have the priests preside over the ceremony before I can accept the test? What I am doing now, is it against the will of God?" Gabriel shook his head. "You didn't go against God's will. I'm doing this so that you can successfully pass God's test. If you can't pass, you won't get God's approval. But I believe you can." Seeing that Maria still had some doubts, Gabriel thought for a moment and said, "Let me tell you something that just happened in this town today." Gabriel told her about the dispute in the north square of the town, and finally said, "I think what Mr. Aristotle said is not unreasonable. The will of God is the premise. As long as you pass the test, you will be recognized by God, because as a candidate for the saintess, you have already got the God's tear." Maria blinked her beautiful big eyes and thought for a long time. Finally, she nodded and said, "Yes, you are right. You know the rules of the temple of Isis better than I do. I will not let you down." Gabriel shook his head gently again. "No, not me. You will not let the great holy mother of Isis down." At this time, Maria suddenly thought of something and asked doubtfully, "But you have been here all the time. How can you hear every word of the people on the other side of the town? Every word was so clear, but I did not hear anything. Is this the power of God?" Gabriel smiled again. "This is the power given by the gods. I can hear each and every one of their voices, as long as I focus my mind and am willing to listen. As the saintess of the temple of Isis, you will have divine power far more powerful than me. I am a warrior, and it is impossible for me to learn supreme magic, but you will master the supreme magic of the temple of Isis." As soon as he said this, he heard the voice of the servant downstairs. "Lord Gabriel, Mr. Aristotle has found the servant you need and brought him here." Amon knew very well that it was Aristotle and Crazy Ole who saved him today. It was not surprising that Crazy Ole would help him. But this strange young man was obviously a nobleman. Why would he help a minor he did not know? Aman was very grateful and happy to have the opportunity to serve this gentleman. It was just 3 days of being a servant, not to mention the generous remuneration of 1 gold coin a day. On the way, Aman expressed his gratitude and wanted to kneel down and kiss the soil in front of Aristotle's feet according to the most solemn etiquette he knew. But Aristotle stopped him and said with a smile, "Child, you don't have to do this. You are not my slave, and I am not a god or a monarch." Then he looked at Aman and asked, "Do you want to ask me why I am helping you?" Aman nodded, "Yes, sir, I want to ask." Aristotle looked into the distance and seemed to be talking to himself. "I come from a place far away from the mainland, a place called Heaton. There are many city-states there. I used to study in Plato's academy. My teacher once said, 'Why do we need to seek knowledge? Virtue is knowledge, and a wise person should become a kind person.'" Aman blinked and asked, "Hilton? Have you heard of a sage called Te-Adad?" Aristotle was slightly taken aback. "I've seen him in Plato Academy. He's a student of my teacher's friend, Theodorus." "Child, how did you hear of his name?" Aman replied, "An old man in the town told me, the one who spoke to you just now." Aman had heard the name Te-Adad from Crazy Ol. It was said that this sage claimed that there were only 5 regular polyhedrons in the world, and the regular dodecahedron was the most special of them all. It was the outline of the world drawn by God, and it contained the mysterious information of the 5th element. It was the source and symbol of mysterious power. Aman thought it was just Crazy Ol's drunken words. He did not expect that there was such a person. It seemed that what Crazy Ol said was true. The two continued to walk to the south of the town. Aristotle seemed to be very interested in the child. As they walked, he asked, "We were discussing the oracle in front of the shrine just now. Do you know the true spirit of divinity? Why is the god who left the oracle called the god of protection?" But the god was the god, and the oracle was the oracle. It seemed that the people in the town had never asked about it. Aman did not answer. He just said respectfully, "Sir, please enlighten me." Aristotle smiled, "In fact, I'm not sure. I just want to discuss with you. The reason why the oracle is called the god of protection is that it is really protecting the people here. The parangons produced here are so precious, and the mining skills are passed down from generation to generation. How can we stop people from driving underage children to take on such heavy work out of greed? So that the craftsmen here can be better protected generation after generation, so that the young men will not die young." Aman's confused mind seemed to be awakened by a ray of light. He suddenly understood something and nodded, "The oracle, that's the oracle. Children who are not adults can't learn the skills of mining, and women can't mine parangons." Aristotle also nodded, "Yes, that's why the god in the shrine is called the god of protection. No matter how the oracle was first passed down, it is indeed needed here. Child, if you become a priest in the future, you must also protect the oracle, but you must understand the true spirit of divinity and its source. You can't be like the priest just now." After saying this, he thought for a moment and couldn't help but smile again. He turned to Aman and said, "The spirit of the oracle is that men under the age of 16 are not allowed to learn the skills of mining. But in the local language, allowed and may are the same words. Do you understand what I mean? So today the priest can't argue with me. But you must understand the difference, or you will be confused like the others." From the north to the south, Aman had been thinking. While they were talking, they arrived at the small building where Maria lived. Chapter 7. He's a man. Gabriel looked at Aman and said to Aristotle in a slightly dissatisfied tone. Aristotle replied with a smile, "He's still a minor child, and he meets your requirements. Sir, as you can see, it's very difficult to find a person in this town who doesn't have dust in his hair and mud under his nails. He's the only one I found. And there's one more thing I want to tell you. This child is the miner who mined the god's tear. Without a pure heart and the blessing of the goddess Isis, can he welcome the arrival of the god's tear?" Gabriel nodded and said in a much softer tone, "I heard the discussion on the other side of the town, and I know who you brought. It turns out that the parangon that the boy mined was the god's tear, but he was almost punished by the priest here." Aristotle nodded and said, "Yes. So, can we keep this child? Aman looked up at Gabriel and found that the warrior was staring at his face. Gabriel's eyes seemed to have a sharp penetrating power. As soon as their eyes met, Aman involuntarily lowered his head. This lady was very beautiful, the most beautiful woman Aman had ever seen. But Aman felt that there was a kind of surging tension in her tall and straight posture, as if she could push people away. The first impression she gave people was not her beauty, but her majesty. Gabriel said, "Aman, you can stay. Later, follow the maid to change clothes. Your job is very simple, that is, you are responsible for tidying up Lady Maria's food and daily utensils." You're a child, but you still have to be careful. When you're delivering things, you're not allowed to touch Maria. When Maria is washing up or resting, you have to stay away from her and not make a sound. Also, you can't say a word to anyone about what you see and hear here. Otherwise, you will be punished. This was the first time she met Aman, but she called his name. Her requirements for him were even stricter than the rules of the shrine. Although Aman was still a minor boy, she reminded him not to touch Maria, or he would be punished. But she did not say how, and Maria heard it from upstairs. Gabriel scared Aman a few words, and then asked the maid to take him to change clothes, because Aman's clothes, although clean, were very shabby. There was another reason why Gabriel wanted to find a servant to serve Maria. She did not want anyone to know that Maria was learning magic. The ignorant Dushians would not spread this information, but it was hard to say for Roddick's attendants. Before he saw Maria, Gabriel was the most beautiful woman Aman had ever seen. But now that he saw Maria, Aman sincerely thought that she should be the most beautiful woman in the world. He was even a little distracted when he saw Maria. He subconsciously saluted, "Greetings, dear Lady Maria. I am a servant sent to serve you. My name is Aman." Maria was about the same age as Aman, at most 2 years older than him. They were about the same height, but Aman had to call her Lady Maria. Her hair was light brown and had a soft amber luster. It was slightly curly on her shoulders. Her eyes were also light brown with a hint of blue. They were like the stars in the night sky, but also like a clear pool of water. "You are the miner who welcomed the god's tear? Thank you for the blessing of the goddess Isis. I also want to thank you." When Maria spoke, she looked straight into Aman's eyes. Her eyes were calm and gentle. She tried to stay calm and composed, but she could not hide a trace of curiosity. This made Aman a little uneasy. He habitually lowered his head. Her facial features were very beautiful as a hazy imagination in a dream, especially her eyes. Aman couldn't help but blush. He thought to himself, there has never been a girl like her in Duk. Why does she always look into my eyes? In fact, she is about the same age as me. I don't have to be afraid to look her in the eyes. Aman's job was very simple. He was to prepare the utensils necessary for Maria's daily life and send them to the living room on the second floor. When Maria finished using them, he would take them away and hand them to the other servants. For example, it was Aman who brought Maria's 3 meals a day. Maria didn't eat much. Her appetite was less than a third of Aman's, but she had to prepare a lot of things. All kinds of silverware were placed on the small table. Aman had to wash his hands and cut the food. Knives and spoons were placed in the designated places. Silver jugs filled with goat's milk, cups for drinking water, and small plates dipped in salt and spices were placed on the left and right sides of the table. The table had to be set down facing Maria's table without making a sound or spilling the milk or soup on the table. The table was very heavy. It was not easy for a 14-year-old boy to carry such a table up to the second floor and put it down without making a sound. But Aman could already control the heavy hammer to mine parangons. It was a piece of cake for him. When Maria ate, she barely made a sound. Even the utensils didn't collide. She was very quiet and well-mannered. Aman stood at the side and waited for her to finish eating before taking the table away. Then he gave her water to wash her face and rinse her mouth and went out. When Maria finished washing up, he came back in and took away the utensils. Then he stood on the stairs and waited for the summons. As an adoratress, if she was in the shrine of Isis, she could have as many servants as there were clouds in the sky. But in Duk, Aman was the only servant who was in charge of her daily necessities. During the meal, Aman and Maria spent the most time together. Growing up in Duk, Aman had never seen anyone so clean. It might not be appropriate to describe Maria as clean. She gave people the feeling of purity. He could not speak without Maria's permission. But between meals, after taking a sip of water or goat's milk, Maria would often ask him questions, such as the situation in Duk, how the miners mined the parangons, and so on. She was also very curious about these things. Aman answered her questions carefully. He found that Maria seemed to have a habit of looking directly into his eyes when she spoke. Her lips seemed to be slightly curved, showing a gentle smile. This made Aman a little uncomfortable. His heart was beating wildly. He didn't even know where to put his hands. She is very beautiful. I want to look at her. But why don't I dare? Her eyes are not scary at all. Why should I be afraid? Aman thought to himself. He even felt a trace of indescribable depression. Aman didn't know that Maria didn't have this habit before. Now she was just following Gabriel's instructions. While Gabriel was teaching her the divine arts, he also reminded her, "Lady Maria, you are very pure. This is the temperament of our adoratress. But you are still too young and too soft. As a qualified adoratress, you are protecting the dignity of goddess Isis. You can't give anyone a feeling of timidity. From now on, you have to pay attention to one thing. When you speak to anyone, look them straight in the eyes. Your eyes must be peaceful, but there can't be a trace of flinching or evasion. Just like how a goddess looks at her people. Whether they are nobles or slaves, when you ask questions, you have to look into their eyes like this. This is how a adoratress should be. No one dares to look down on you. Under your gaze, they will feel the mercy of the great goddess Isis." But there was hardly anyone around Maria who could make her practice like this. The most suitable person was Aman. Poor Aman didn't know this. He was quite helpless under Maria's gaze. Aman didn't know who Maria was. Even if someone told him, he didn't know what the adoratress of the temple of Isis was. He only knew that Maria was a noble. He had to call her lady. He couldn't defend her. Would it be offensive to look at this beautiful girl and meet her gaze? Crazy Ol never told him about this, and his drunkard father would never tell him. Probably not. She's looking at me, Aman thought to himself. At the same time, he felt ashamed of his helpless reaction. How could he be so disappointing? Fortunately, there was nothing else disturbing. The job of 1 gold coin a day seemed easy. But on the first night, there was an accident. At that time, Aman had fallen asleep on the wooden plank under the stairs and was having a very hazy dream. In the dream, Maria looked at him, and he looked at Maria with the same eyes. It was a strange feeling, as if he had just taken a bath in the cold spring of the charcoal forest and was sitting by the pool to rest. At this moment, Aman suddenly heard a scream. It was not loud, deliberately suppressed to make it sound less shrill, but it was obvious that the person was very scared. It was Maria's voice, coming from the room on the 2nd floor. Aman immediately jumped up. He was a little drowsy and forgot that he was not at home. His head hit the wooden plank under the stairs and hurt. But Aman couldn't care less. He jumped out of the stairs, grabbed the wooden railing and rushed upstairs. He passed through the living room and came to the door of Maria's bedroom. Chapter 8. The door of Maria's bedroom was open, and Gabriel was already standing by the bed. If Aman remembered correctly, Gabriel should be resting in the room closest to the door at night. When Aman rushed up the stairs, he did not see Gabriel at all, which meant that when Maria just called out, Aman did not have time to get up from the bottom of the stairs, and Gabriel had already gone upstairs. This speed was amazing, almost like teleportation. Gabriel's sword was already out of its sheath, and the blade was covered with a faint silver halo. It was not bright, but it stung the eyes. Gabriel's expression was a bit strange, with a hint of surprise, and the tip of the sword was pointing at a small furry animal in front of the bed. "Aman, how did this cat get in?" Gabriel knew that Aman was already at the door without looking back, so she asked in a low voice. "Isn't this Schrödinger?" Aman recognized the cat sleeping at Maria's feet. It was Crazy Ol's cat. It was lazy, greedy, fat, and dirty. Its gray and white fur was always covered with ashes, and even its white fur looked gray. It slept all day long. Crazy, Ole even named the cat Schrödinger. How did it get into Maria's room? No, I don't know how it got in, Aman answered honestly. Gabriel just asked casually, and then realized that even she did not notice the cat sneaking in, so it was useless to ask the miner. At this time, Maria said apologetically, I'm sorry, I woke you all up. I didn't know the cat was sleeping here, and I almost stepped on it. Lord Gabriel, don't hurt it, it's just sleeping. Gabriel put away her sword, don't call me Lord. From now on, just call me Gabriel. As you said, of course, I won't hurt the cat. Don't say sorry, it's not appropriate. It's my sacred duty to protect you. Aman, take this cat away and make sure it won't disturb Lady Maria's rest again. Aman agreed, lowered his head, and walked forward to pick up Schrödinger. This lazy cat was really good at sleeping. After making such a big noise, it still didn't wake up when Aman picked it up. When Aman lowered his head, he saw Maria's feet. She wasn't wearing shoes, and her delicate and fair ankles were exposed under her nightgown. Her toenails were pink and looked so cute. Aman's heart inexplicably thumped wildly. He then tried his best to control his breathing, making it calm down and his heartbeat become even. This was one of the most advanced techniques in Duk. Only by keeping one's body in a very calm state could one ensure the success of every mining attempt. Aman's training was far stricter than that of the other people in the town. To a large extent, it was due to the experience of bathing in the bone-chilling spring. Even Gabriel couldn't see any flaws. The child was indeed a little flustered when he rushed upstairs, which was normal. But when he saw that Lady Maria was fine, he immediately calmed down. Although it seemed so on the surface, Aman's heart was quite turbulent. Maria was only wearing a nightgown. When he squatted down, he saw her feet. When he stood up, he still lowered his head, and his eyes just happened to see her pink breasts. The neckline of the nightgown was not low, but from this angle he could still see a small piece of skin under her neck. What's more, his eyes seemed to be able to see through the nightgown and through his imagination. Maria's nightgown was not thin or thick. It was very soft and close-fitting and slightly loose. It was made of a very comfortable material. Girls of her age had already developed. Under the nightgown, the curve of her breasts could be seen, as if it was the most beautiful curve in the world. At the top of the curve, there was a pair of slight protrusions. Were those her breasts? Aman felt his body heating up. Not only his face, but his entire body felt as if it was being scorched by something. It was as if he had just stepped out of a bone-piercing cold spring. This burning feeling made him feel ashamed. He hurriedly held Schrödinger in his arms, bowed 3 steps back, and then turned around and walked out. Outside the door, Aman opened his mouth and took a deep breath. His face was completely red, and even his earlobes were red. When Gabriel rushed into Maria's room, he lit a candle as fast as he could. However, the light was not very bright, and the stairs were even darker. No one could see Aman's expression clearly. When Aman went downstairs, he was shocked and even gasped. He saw that there were already 6 armored warriors standing in the hall downstairs. The 2 at the front were holding shields and axes, the 2 at the back were holding shields and javelins, and the 2 at the side were holding long swords. They stood there silently, but a fierce aura rushed over. Schrödinger seemed to feel it too. In Aman's arms, he meowed discontentedly for a while, arched his head, and curled his body into a ball. What happened? The 6 warriors in the hall did not speak. Another warrior, who looked like a squad leader, standing at the door with a long sword at his waist, asked Aman. Nothing, just a cat. Lady Maria almost stepped on it. She told us not to hurt the animal and to take it away, answered Aman as he walked through the 6 warriors, carrying the cat out of the yard. When he reached the entrance of the courtyard, he was shocked again. There were 2 fully armed warriors standing on the left and right side of the courtyard. Looking at the 4 corners of the courtyard, there was a warrior holding a weapon in each of their hands. They were on full alert. Aman knew that these warriors were Lord Drick's personal guards. They were also the ones who escorted Lord Judah to his house to get the god's tear. Lord Drick's personal guards were usually stationed in the temple of Horus near the yard. They had either heard the commotion or received a special message from Gabriel. They had come so quickly and quietly and were ready for battle. But without Lord Gabriel's instructions, they could not go upstairs to Maria's room. Aman thought to himself, so fast, can I do it too? The answer was yes. But what about wearing armor and holding a weapon? Aman did not have any experience. He thought that he could do it if he had a sledgehammer. He was just a little puzzled. The yard seemed to be quiet and unguarded, but it was actually heavily guarded. How did Schrödinger sneak into Maria's room? With a warrior like Gabriel there, it was almost impossible for a cat to sneak in, let alone fall asleep beside Maria's bed. Aman did not think too much about it. He went outside the yard and put the cat on the ground. He slapped it hard on its rump and said in a low voice, "Go home, Schrödinger. It's dangerous here. Don't come back." Schrödinger woke up and gave a cry of dissatisfaction. It stretched its limbs, shook its fur and ran away. It seemed that it was going to Crazy Old's house. Aman breathed a sigh of relief. When Aman returned to the hall, Gabriel had already gone downstairs and ordered the soldiers to disperse. She stood there and asked Aman, "You are very good at martial arts, and your reflexes are very agile, no less than a low-rank warrior. Have you learned body arts?" Aman was a little surprised and asked, "My lord, are you asking me? I don't know what body arts are, but I have learned the mining skills passed down from generation to generation in Duk. You should already know what happened." Gabriel did not ask any more questions and went back to his room. Everything was quiet again, but it was hard for Aman to calm down. As soon as he closed his eyes, he seemed to see Maria's feet. Then his eyes moved up as she stood up, stopping at her chest. What a fair and tender skin. Perhaps it was because of the shock or the night air, the fine hairs on her body were slightly standing up, and the seductive curves under the nightgown, the two protruding points on the curves. As he thought about it, his body could not help but have a reaction. Aman was still a child, but he was not young anymore. This reaction made him very uneasy and even irritated. He was imagining what the lovely chest looked like under the nightgown. What would it feel like if he put his hand into the neckline? Then he suddenly shuddered, feeling that his thought was an undeserved offense. He inexplicably wanted to go to the cold spring in the charcoal forest to take a bath. He thought to himself that maybe it was because he often bathed in the strange cold spring. Every time he walked out of the cold spring and sat on the shore to rest, his body would feel warm and he would have this reaction. It was so comfortable that he almost wanted to moan, but his mood was not as messed up as it was now. But Aman could not go tonight. He had to sleep on the wooden plank under the stairs. Of course, he did not sleep well that night. At lunch the next day, Aman stood at the side. His mood was still a little messed up, but he carefully kept his voice low and did not dare to show anything unusual. What made him uncomfortable was that Maria was still staring at him. He could feel her gaze. At this time, he heard Maria whisper, "That cat yesterday, you didn't hurt it, did you?" Aman, No, according to your orders, I let it go." Maria, "Thank you, Aman, for yesterday." Aman quickly replied, "You don't have to thank me, my lord. As your servant, this is what I should do. It is my fault that your rest was disturbed." As he spoke, he finally raised his eyes and looked into Maria's eyes. Perhaps he was plucking up his courage, or perhaps he was angry with himself. He had seen her like that yesterday, so why did he not dare to look into her eyes today? Maria was obviously a little surprised. She did not expect the young man to raise his eyes to meet hers, which made her a little unaccustomed. Instinctively, she wanted to avoid his gaze, but she remembered Gabriel's instructions. So she still looked at him, but she could not hide a trace of embarrassment. How can there be such a lazy cat? How can it not wake up? Its name is Schrödinger. It's really lazy. It's the cat of the crazy old man in town. That cat has a name? Who is the crazy old man? He's the oldest man in the town, and he's also my friend. The two kept looking into each other's eyes as they spoke, as if challenging each other. It seemed that no one was willing to be the first to avoid eye contact. Both of them were somewhat childish. She is very beautiful. I like to look at her like this. Aman thought in his heart. In the end, it was Maria who looked away first, but it did not seem like she was avoiding eye contact. She lowered her head to eat and no longer asked Aman questions. She did not eat much today, much less than yesterday. When Aman looked into her eyes, he could see a trace of uneasiness deep in her eyes. She seemed to be uncomfortable, as if she was enduring some kind of pain, but she was trying to remain calm. Aman wanted to ask her what was wrong, but he could not. He could only answer Maria's questions, but he could not take the initiative to ask Maria. Chapter 9. Breasts, Part 2. That night, Aman did not sleep well again. As soon as he closed his eyes, he seemed to see Maria's eyes. All kinds of distracting thoughts came to him. He tried not to think about them, but he could not help but think about them. Under her gaze, he felt as if he had been softened, and his body was a little stiff under the stimulation of desire. Usually, when he was in a bad mood, he would go to the cold spring to take a bath. But at this moment, he could not help but think that there was something strange about the cold spring. Was it the biting chill that made him like this? Aman still did not understand many things. The budding of a young man's feelings was so quiet. He also did not know that Maria's feelings at the moment were more complicated than his. Maria did not sleep, but prayed to the gods Tyr, using the unique method taught by Gabriel to awaken the power given by the gods. It went better than Gabriel had expected. She had succeeded. She felt as if she could use an invisible force that permeated around her. Perhaps it was not accurate to call it power. Perhaps it was energy or ability. But at the same time, all kinds of messy desires lurking in the depths of her soul seemed to be awakened and magnified, impacting her mind. She remembered many things that she thought she had ignored and the wishes that she had given up. Maria did not doubt her devotion to the goddess Isis, but her life was not just a blank piece of paper. She was also a beloved noble girl. Maria was 16 years old. Her grandfather was a businessman in Cape States. He was rewarded for organizing a fleet to follow the Igut army and provide logistics and military supplies. Maria's family was not very high among the nobles in Cape States, but they were very rich. But after her grandfather died, her father inherited the family business. He still focused on business, but he was not as successful as her grandfather. Her father was most proud of his daughter, Iko Maria. When Iko was 14 years old, she followed her father to the shrine in Cape State. People said that she was the most beautiful girl in Cape State. Half a year ago, the Maria family's fleet encountered a storm at sea and suffered heavy losses. They urgently needed a large sum of money to make up for the losses. Her father borrowed money from a friend of her grandfather, who was very wealthy and influential in Cape States. However, this honorable lord made a condition. If he wanted to marry Maria and keep the family business, his father had to agree. Coincidentally, a visiting king from the kingdom of Babylon met Maria during a meeting in the Shrine of Light. He directly requested to marry Maria as his concubine and sent a letter to Raddik, the governor of the city. Maria's father didn't know what to do. Coincidentally, the news of the saintess selection at the Temple of Isis in Montefiore came. He went to beg Castellan Raddik to let Iko Maria participate in the selection. In the local temple, the priests thought that Maria met the requirements and became a candidate for saintess, temporarily solving the problem. But Maria had to become a real saintess in order to solve all the problems. Maria was devout to the goddess of Isis, but whether her desire to become the saintess contained selfishness, Maria herself couldn't tell. No one could tell. After getting the gods Tyr, Maria finally felt relieved. All the troubles of her family were expected to be solved. Especially after mastering the preliminary magic, she felt extremely relaxed. At the same time, many desires were awakened. She would become the saintess who guarded the goddess of Isis, which meant that she would have to live a high and aloof life. Everything she did, every word she said, and even every look in her eyes had to be in line with the identity of a saintess. She would never have physical contact with any adult man, and there were special rules and requirements for the objects she used, and so on. It was more or less against the nature of a young girl. Maria also read all kinds of stories in the papyrus poems. The thrilling war and romantic feelings, and she had all kinds of fantasies about her future. But after she decided to become a saintess and dedicated herself to the great goddess of Isis, She had to give up all these wishes, including the desires in the secular world. But now Maria felt very uncomfortable. Her body and soul were filled with an indescribable turbulence. Gabriel told her that this was a test of God that she had to face. As the power given by God was awakened, it was impossible to forcibly suppress it with one's will. She could only face it with a pure heart and not be influenced by it. Maria could do it, and Gabriel had no doubt about it. But she seemed to have encountered a little challenge. Today at dinner, she and Aman looked at each other as if they were challenging each other. No one knew what they wanted to win. Although Aman was only the son of a miner, Maria was very curious about him and even had wonderful fantasies about him. It was Aman who had mined the god's tear. He was a young boy blessed by the goddess of Isis, so he could welcome the god's tear. But Maria also heard about what happened in the town square that day. Aman almost had a finger cut off precisely because he had mined the god's tear. Because of this, people debated and determined that he had been blessed by the goddess of Murin, which had never happened in the town for hundreds of years. What kind of young man could get the pity of two completely different gods at the same time, create a rare adventure in 100 years, get the blessing of the goddess Murin, and mine the god's tear that Isis gave him? This was a miracle. This was a legend. Although Maria had read about miracles and legends, she had never experienced it herself. She could not help but look for the shadow of the story in Aman. Although Aman was still childish, he was also very handsome, always with a stubborn and calm expression. In fact, Maria liked to look at him, but she did not know why she liked him. Last night, when Aman picked up the cat, Maria could feel his eyes falling on her chest. It seemed to have a physical touch. Was that an illusion? But Maria felt as if her body was being burned by his eyes, and the turmoil that attacked her soul was inexplicably magnified. She could not help but want to tremble. If it were any other time, Maria would never have such a reaction. But she was crossing the threshold of mastering magic and accepting the legendary test of God. In fact, the real test was the desire that she had to abandon. Maria knew very well that after leaving Duk, she would say goodbye to this young man forever, and it also meant that she would say goodbye to the secular life of her girlhood forever. This was a symbol. She was determined to do this, but there was a kind of regret that tormented her body and mind. When she prayed to the god's tear, the pale golden parangan emitted a faint halo to her. She seemed to be shrouded in holy light. This meant that Maria had begun to awaken the power bestowed by the gods. But at the same time, she felt as if the light of the parangan had become Aman's eyes, burning her chest and body. She did not know whether it was comfortable or uncomfortable, but she could not help but feel a little dazed. On the third day, Aman stood beside her for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. When Maria looked at him while talking, he also looked at Maria. He found that if they looked at each other for a long time, Maria's breathing became a little irregular and her face became flushed. She seemed to be very uncomfortable. Was she sick? After dinner, it was time for Maria to pray again. She said to Aman, "I want to wash my face. Please bring the water to my room. The water must be cold. No hot water." Maria had been using warm water for the past few days, but today she deliberately asked for cold water, which made Aman feel a little strange. He carried the heavy basin to Maria's room and put it down. Usually, when Maria was dressing, her maid would wait on her, but now she was alone. Even Aman had to stand at the stairs to avoid her. "Lady Maria, are you not feeling well? Should I tell Lord Gabriel?" Aman should have left after putting down the basin, but he took the initiative to ask. He couldn't hold it in for 2 days because he felt that Maria's breath seemed to be very hot. When Aman, who never took the initiative to speak, suddenly spoke, Maria seemed to be startled. Her shoulders suddenly trembled. There was no wind, but the door silently closed, as if it had been pushed by an invisible force. Aman should have turned and walked out, but his body didn't move. Then he felt himself being pulled by an invisible force, and there was a short blank in his memory. For a long time after that, Aman couldn't remember what had happened. When he could remember clearly, he was already standing in front of Maria, so close. He was in her arms, or rather, he was holding her in his arms. His left hand was around her waist, and his right hand was on her chest. Her breath seemed to be burning him, and his gaze seemed to be burning her. His hand was placed on her soft chest, and he felt his entire body soften, as if he was being burned by something hot. The aura around the two of them seemed to become soft and sticky, and they seemed to be absorbing each other. She was so weak, and her body couldn't help but tremble in his hands. Amon's right hand quietly exerted force, and he tightly grasped her chest through her clothes. His palm could feel the seductive protrusion under the material of the clothes. The young girl's breasts weren't exaggerated, and Amon's fingers could completely cover them. Their hearts were beating very fast, and there was a panting sound at the tip of their noses. Amon's hand moved up the curve of her chest, and he tried to reach through the cloth and hold her chest completely in his hands. It was so tempting, as if it was filled with the sweetest temptation in the world. When he did this, he happened to see Maria looking at him. Her eyes seemed to be in pain and blurred, and her lips were slightly open. Amon had already forgotten to think, and he welcomed his breath and tried to kiss her. Just when their lips were about to touch, Maria's body trembled even more, and she suddenly reached out and pushed him. Her hand was so weak, and it looked like it couldn't push away the strong Amon, but Amon flew backwards. The invisible force appeared again, and Amon, who was a little confused, couldn't resist at all. He fell to the ground, and the door behind him opened silently again. Everything happened so suddenly and inexplicably. I didn't expect it, I really didn't expect it. I'm sorry, it's all my fault. Amon, you must have been sent by goddess Isis to test me. Maria saw that Amon had fallen heavily, and she wanted to reach out to help him up, but she stopped after taking half a step. As she spoke, her face that seemed to have been burned had instantly turned pale. What happened here? A voice suddenly came from outside the door. Amon turned around and saw that Gabriel was already standing at the door. She came so fast that nothing could happen in time, even though nothing would have happened in the first place. Chapter 10. Amon was caught off guard and fell heavily to the ground. There was a blanket in front of the door, so he was not injured. He stood up and stepped aside to answer, I was careless. Maybe I tripped on the carpet when I stepped back. I was careless. I showed my power just now, but I didn't control it well. Maria spoke at the same time, and her tone was a little panicked. Gabriel's attention was immediately attracted by Maria's words. His eyes lit up. My lord, you can already? He paused and turned to Amon. There's nothing else for you to do here. Go out and close the door. The inexplicable caress, the sudden push and the fall, Amon still did not know what had happened, but he had calmed down from the confusion. He should feel lucky. If Maria had said something wrong, it was very likely that he would have lost his life. Even if Gabriel let him go, Roddick might have sent someone to kill him. After Amon went downstairs, Gabriel said to Maria in surprise, My lord, you really did not let the goddess Isis down. Just now you accidentally pushed Amon down. It's not easy to get used to this kind of power at the beginning. Maria nodded. Yes, I reached out and pushed him down from a distance. Is this the power of the gods? When Gabriel came in, Amon was sitting on the ground, and Maria was standing with one hand stretched out. It looked as if she had pushed Amon through the air. Maria did not mean to lie, but on the first day Amon came, she heard Gabriel's order that Amon was not allowed to touch her, or he would be punished. What kind of punishment would it be? Would it be like the priest of Duk cutting off one of his fingers? How terrible that would be. It was not Amon's fault. Gabriel did not care about this. She was attracted by another topic. She smiled and said, Yes, this is the power given by the gods. You have just grasped it, so it is not very powerful. Amon is very strong, but you can push him down with a wave of your hand. Any ordinary person could push open a door, but you were able to do it without stretching out your hand. This was a miracle created by divine power. Lady Maria, you have to be careful. Don't use it rashly before you become familiar with it. In fact, for someone like Amon who had mastered low-level body arts, if he understood the rules of magic and was prepared, it would be impossible to defeat him. But in the future, your divine power will be incomparably powerful, especially with the help of the gods Tyr. Amon stood downstairs, still in a daze. Maria's scent still lingered in his hands and on his body, bringing with it a warm fragrance that was intoxicating. He also did not understand what had just happened. Why did he hold her like that and then get pushed away? He was not very clear, but he could understand. During the day, the two of them looked like they were provoking each other. Last night, he almost dreamed of the same scene, and just now, he really put his hand on her chest. He did not know how long he stood there. Gabriel came downstairs and suddenly asked, "Aman, what did you see just now?" Aman came back to his senses, bowed and replied, "My lord, I saw nothing and heard nothing. I was just bringing water to Lady Maria." Gabriel's eyes seemed to penetrate his soul. "Not even to me?" "Yes, my lord. You told me not to mention to anyone what I saw and heard here. You are also a human, so of course, I can't mention it to you either." He was very smart. He had already learned the syllogism taught by Aristotle, so he answered Gabriel's question. He really did not know what to say about what happened in Maria's room. Gabriel's serious face finally showed a faint smile. "Good, very good. Remember what you said, your work is done, and the payment has been paid to your father. You can go home now." He did not expect that Gabriel would send him away now. His work was done, and he had received the payment. Aman should have been very relaxed and happy, but when he left the courtyard, he felt an indescribable melancholy. He looked back as if saying goodbye without words. Roddick was finally happy because Gabriel told him that he could leave now. He asked him to prepare overnight so that he could finally leave this damn place. Gabriel also explained to him that the reason why he stayed in this town for 3 more days was not only because Maria was sick, but also because he was teaching Maria some special rituals and rules of the Temple of Isis so that she could be recognized as the adoratress. Now Maria had learned them. This made Roddick even happier. If it was someone else, he would have given a large sum of money to express his gratitude, but this Lord Gabriel was obviously not willing to accept bribes. Roddick thought for a long time and personally gave Gabriel a carefully made shield that was blessed with magic. It was a warrior's glorious weapon, and he explained that this shield was originally intended to be offered to the temple. Gabriel accepted it. What kind of gift to give and how to make people happy and not refuse was also a skill. Lord Roddick was obviously an expert in this. After 3 days of rest, Maria's maid also recovered. The next day, after breakfast, Lord Roddick's huge and magnificent caravan set off. The merchants who came to the town of Duk were getting impatient, but they didn't want to leave on their own. They couldn't hire mercenaries to protect them in Duk. Last night, when they heard that Lord Drick was going to return, they happily packed up and left with Lord Drick's caravan. The town of Duk, which had been bustling for many days, finally returned to peace. The townspeople were enjoying the wine and food brought by the caravan. Many people's furnaces had stopped burning. After being busy for so many days, it was rare for them to relax. Even the mayor did not urge the miners to hurry up. The townspeople had paid a lot of parangons during this period of time, so it was only right for them to relax. Everyone was relaxed except for Roddick. Before returning to Cape States, they would have to cross a desolate desert and undulating Gobi. Anything could happen, and he could not guarantee the safety of Maria and the God's Tear. He had told Mayor Dusty in private that the news of the God's Tear must not be spread. But the night before yesterday he received a secret report. Shag, the priest of the temple, had sent an emissary to Saya to deliver the quarterly parangons to the temple. This was a rule that no one could stop. But Roddick felt that something was wrong. He even thought of sending someone to kill Shag's emissary, but in the end he did not do so. From Duk to Saya, there was no way to go around the post road through the charcoal forest. There were checkpoints along the road, and it was impossible for his men to avoid the checkpoints before catching up with the emissary. It would be difficult to cover their tracks. Besides, this was the territory of the Hittite kingdom. Sending someone to kill the emissary of the temple was a serious crime. If it was exposed, even Lord Dick would not be able to bear the accusation. When the caravan entered the desert, Roddick looked back at the direction of Duk, which had disappeared into the horizon. He thought to himself, "Is this place blessed by the gods or abandoned? What a strange place." In Lord Drick's opinion, The mining skills passed down from generation to generation in Duk included body arts. Qualified adult miners in Duk had practiced body arts as well as low-level warriors. Among them, the most outstanding ones had already mastered the second-level body arts, awakening the power sleeping in their blood, and were able to use it skillfully. A low-level warrior who had mastered body arts would be an elite even in the army of the Empire of Igut. What was more frightening was that the skills of the miners actually included basic magic. Although it was the simplest and had not passed the test of God, it was still magic. If it was used together with body arts, the power would be amazing. The miners here only used this skill to mine, not to fight. If all the miners in the town were to gather together and teach them how to fight and how to use weapons, the town would be able to resist an ordinary army. Even if the miners gathered together and fought with their hammers, it would still be very difficult to deal with them. When he lived in Duk, Roddik even thought that if a large-scale civil riot broke out, his personal guards would not be able to stop it. The most he could do was to protect Maria and help her escape. Saya was located at the junction of Hittite, Assur, Babylon, and Igut. It had been ruled by different dynasties in history, but the small town of Duk belonging to Saya had never been conquered by an army. Every dynasty that conquered the city of Saya would send messengers to Duk to inform them of the change of ruler. The status of Duk would still be guaranteed. As long as the relationship remained the same as before, they would still send troops to guard the post roads in the charcoal forest, collect the same taxes and provide protection on the trade routes. The reason was simple. It was not that they could not conquer Duk with absolute power, but that the price was not worth it. Of course, it was not necessary to mobilize an elite army to go through such a difficult journey just to conquer a small town. Besides, every dynasty and kingdom needed the parangons and iron produced in Duk. There was no need to kill or enslave the miners, as long as they could maintain control of the town. The geographical location of Duk was very special. To the north of Duk was the Saya Plateau. The low mountains near the town produced parangons. Further into the distance, the high mountains were an insurmountable natural barrier. To the east, there were also mountains where cavemen lived. The forest was lush and the terrain was complicated. Further into the distance, there was the impassable Great Valley of the Euphrates River. To the west of Duk was the charcoal forest. In the forest, there was a post road leading to the main city of Saya. This was the shortest and most convenient way to get to and from Duk. To the south of Duk was the endless desert, stretching all the way to the border of Cape States of the Empire of Igut. It was more convenient to travel from Cape States to Saya through the desert. There was no need to cross the charcoal forest after reaching Duk. The arable land around Duk was very barren. There was not enough pastures to feed the local population. But its products were very important. This made it difficult for Duk to exist without Saya. The shrines in the town had to listen to the shrines in the city. Another special feature of Duk was that there were almost no slaves in the town. Except for the two families of Dusty and Shog, the rest of the residents were commoners. This was completely different from the rest of the continent. The reason was simple. All the countries around Duk had the same law. Slaves were not allowed to touch parangons. Every time they violated the law, a finger would be chopped off. Interestingly, the punishment that Aman almost received was also a finger chopped off. But there was another law in the neighboring countries that seemed to be deliberately ignored. Both the Kingdom of Babylon and the Empire of Igut seemed to turn a blind eye to the situation in Duk. This law stated that slaves were not allowed to learn body arts, and only nobles were qualified to learn divine arts. Those who practiced divine arts without permission would be regarded as disrespectful to the gods and would be severely punished by the major shrines. In fact, it was so difficult to learn divine arts. Even among the qualified nobles, many could not cross the threshold of awakening the power bestowed by the gods. Without the strict guidance of the priests of the shrine, it was even more difficult to practice on their own. But there were many people in the world. There were always outstanding geniuses who mastered magic without permission or guidance from the priests. These people were called sorcerers or sorcerers on the continent. In short, it was a degrading and evil title. According to the law, they would be hunted down by the shrines. The priests or nobles who mastered magic were called mages. Parangons were also produced in other places on the continent. But the last step of extracting the parangons from the ore was done by low-level mages, because it required the use of the most basic magic skills. Therefore, parangons were not only expensive but also sacred. But the situation in Duk was obviously different. The environment here was so harsh, the location was so remote, and the production of parangons was so high that it was impossible for there to be so many noble mages working here. All the parangons were mined by the miners. Perhaps it was because of the god who gave the parangons, but no one in power in Duk mentioned the fact that basic magic was included in the mining skills passed down from generation to generation. It was as if they had never seen it. Even the residents of Duk themselves did not know about it. Saya said that the miners of Duk could keep 1 out of every 10 parangons they mined. This was the envy of the people on the continent. But at the same time, there was also a law that stated that miners registered in the Shrine of Duk were not allowed to leave this place without permission. Perhaps this was also the reason. In fact, because of the geographical restrictions, it was difficult for them to leave without permission. Duk not only produced parangons, but also iron, especially fine iron. But the blacksmiths here were not allowed to forge weapons, so they only produced iron embryos. What Roddick smuggled this time was a batch of fine iron embryos. Roddick was thinking about all the special features of Duk. He sat under the shed and looked at the sand dunes in the distance with his hand on the hilt of his sword. The caravan set out at dawn, taking advantage of the coolness of the early morning. Now noon was getting closer and closer. The scorching sun shone on the sand, and the heat reflected from all sides gradually became unbearable. A stretch of hills appeared in the distance on the right. There were strange boulders on the hills, and it was just nice to find a shadowy area to rest for a while, hiding from the scorching afternoon sun before continuing. Walking in the desert was just that troublesome. Roddick insisted on sitting in front of the first carriage of the caravan. Gabriel even praised him, "My lord, you are so brave." Rodrick was worried, afraid that they would be ambushed along the way. It was said that there were dangerous desert tribes that appeared here, and they specialized in attacking caravans. It was possible that they were bandits from the border countries in disguise. The so-called vicious and dangerous desert tribes might just be a legend. But ordinary bandits would not attack a caravan like Lord Dick's. They could see elite guards from far away, so they might have already escaped. But if someone special came for a special purpose, then it would be different. Otherwise, Roddick would not have brought his personal guards with him. Lord Dick knew very well that no one in his personal guards was better at body arts than him. His body arts had reached the 6th level, and he was only 1 step away from becoming a supreme warrior. Most of the personal guards were around the first 3 carriages of the caravan. Maria was in the 2nd carriage and Gabriel was in it. Roddick saw the hills in the distance and was about to order the caravan to change direction when he suddenly heard Gabriel shout, "Everyone, stop." This shout was like thunder, and it spread far over the desert. Roddick had told them that Lord Gabriel's words were his orders, and they were the same as his own. The well-trained drivers in the caravan reacted very quickly. They shouted and pulled on the reins of the animals. The 10 carriages in front of them stopped almost at the same time, and the soldiers on horseback also pulled on the reins. The caravan behind them was a little chaotic. Some carriages bumped into each other, some people fell off their camels, and some goods were overturned. Roddick jumped up and pulled out his sword, but he did not see any danger. At this time, a silver light burst out of his head and flew towards the sand dunes in front of him. When he looked up, he saw Gabriel standing on top of his carriage with a shield in one hand and a sword in the other. Chapter 11. The silver light fell like lightning under the scorching sun, striking the flat area between the 2 sand dunes in front of them. No matter where the convoy went, they would pass through it. Rodrick's heart seemed to contract, and his pupils shrank. When he saw this silver light, he realized that Gabriel's physical arts were at least above the 7th level. She was a high-level supreme warrior, and she was among the top warriors on this continent. There were 60 to 70 steps between the first car and the 2 sand dunes. It was difficult for Roddick's swordsmanship to deal damage at this distance, and he hadn't found the hidden danger there. Gabriel didn't have time to care about what Roddick thought at the moment. In fact, she had found the signs of danger further away. It was not until this distance that her swordsmanship was effective that she suddenly launched an attack, catching people off guard. The sword light cut between the sand dunes. The sand suddenly sank, and several iron chains with barbs and spikes were exposed. There was a trap there. If they were not careful and fell into the trap, the first car of the convoy would fall and block the whole convoy. A cloud of sand burst out on both sides of the trap. Two people with a shield in one hand and a long-handled battle-axe in the other jumped out, looking very embarrassed. Holding a shield and attacking with a long-handled battle-axe in one hand required extraordinary strength and agility, which was not something that ordinary warriors could do. These two people covered their faces with scarves, and their clothes were the same light yellow as the sand dunes. They had been quietly hiding under the hot sand for so long. If Roddick's car fell, the two battle-axes on the left and right would be the summons of death. Gabriel didn't just slash once. She then turned her wrist beautifully in the air and slashed two more sword lights to both sides, like two lines of meteors whistling along the sand. Two flying sand rolled up, and dozens of yellow figures jumped out of the sand. There were also iron chains flying out of the sand. Several people nearby splashed blood, and the nearest iron chain more than 10 steps away had been cut by the sword light. Some people were injured, but there were no screams. They were not ordinary robbers, but well-trained elite warriors. The general outline of the trap and the entire ambush circle in front of them was clear. The trap at the very front was located in the path between two sand dunes. It was a place where the slope turned downhill. On both sides of the trap, there were two groups of people lying in ambush. Under the sand, there were iron chains that could be pulled up at any time, like a pocket. The ambushers on both sides were not wearing any armor. Instead, they were armed with sharp scimitars, a weapon commonly used by the warriors of the Assyrian kingdom. They were usually used in cavalry battles, but they were also quite powerful in infantry battles. The only problem was that one had to be extremely fast when wielding a scimitar. Seeing this scene, Roddick calmed down from the shock and roared out a few commands. He had brought a total of 60 bodyguards, divided into 5 squads of 12 people each. 2 of the squads were cavalry. The most elite team stood guard on both sides of Maria's carriage. They were not affected by the battle in front of them, in case someone took the opportunity to attack the most important target. The other 2 squads did not move forward. Instead, they ran to the back to protect the rear of the whole caravan. At the same time, the squad leader kept the caravan at the back from falling into chaos. Under the leadership of the squad leader, the 2 squads of cavalry came to the front of the caravan and formed a battle formation. The warriors in the front held their shields, and the ones in the back raised their javelins. But the javelins could not be thrown. Seeing that Roddick had formed a battle formation, Gabriel jumped down from the carriage and rushed forward in a flash of silver light. The soldiers with scimitars also rushed towards her. Finally, there were screams. Broken limbs flew, blood stained the sand dunes, and occasionally the sound of weapons colliding could be heard. The scimitars of the warriors finally blocked Gabriel's sword. There was even the sound of the tip of the scimitar scratching through the armor. But Gabriel didn't stop. He held his shield and swung his sword as he charged forward. Everyone in front of him fell. Roddick felt his eyelids twitching. He was also a warrior who had mastered the 6th level of body arts and was at the peak of the advanced level. But as the governor of the Cape States, he had almost never experienced such a solo battle. Gabriel's sword skills were so unstoppable that even Roddick felt his blood boiling. He finally understood why the Temple of Isis in Montefiore only sent one warrior to protect Maria. Ordinary bandits and robbers were no match for Gabriel alone. Roddick thought to himself, if Gabriel was not here to protect Maria, but to assassinate her, would his bodyguards be able to guarantee Maria's safety? Even with the help of a low-level mage, it would still be difficult. The fact that the Temple of Isis could send such a warrior had already left others speechless. But Roddick felt wronged for Gabriel. If such a supreme warrior was accompanied by a mage and 2 bodyguards, it would be even safer. How could they let her come alone? It was too condescending. Gabriel rushed out like this. If there was a high-level mage lying in ambush in the distance, he would be at a disadvantage. Although it was impossible for a noble mage to rob a passerby, the enemy he encountered today was obviously not simple. Roddick could not sit still. He gave an order and rushed out under the protection of 2 squad leaders, following behind Gabriel. But they could not catch up with Gabriel, who was killing enemies along the way. Gabriel had rushed to a position a dozen steps away from the trap in the sand dunes, leaving behind the bodies of the enemies. There were no more warriors with machetes in front of him. The first 2 warriors who appeared were clad in armor and wielding long axes. They did not rush over like the others. Instead, they gathered their strength and stood there, looking down from above. They seemed to be the most powerful opponents. At this moment, Gabriel's attention should be completely attracted by the 2 warriors. Suddenly, a strange beast-like roar came from the left and right, and 2 people suddenly emerged from the sand dunes. If one looked closely, there should be 3 people. Behind the figure on the left stood another person. However, the 2 people on the left and right were too tall. The last person was shrouded in the shadow of the person in front. He appeared silently and was difficult to detect. His figure was very faint and seemed to be in a trance. He must have used some kind of magic to hide his tracks. According to the measurement method on the continent, the diameter of a parangan was 1 inch and 10 inches was 1 foot. The 2 people were more than 10 feet tall. Standing there, they looked like 2 hills. Their arms were thicker than an adult's thighs. Roddick recognized them. They were the mountain giants who lived in the distant east of the kingdom of Assur. The mountain giants lived in the cold highlands. It was said that they were the descendants of the legendary giants. In fact, there was not much difference between them and ordinary people, except that they were huge. They could also learn body arts. Although they were not very agile, they possessed extraordinary strength. The armies of the nearby kingdoms also recruited and trained these people. The best ones were heavy soldiers who used blunt weapons. They could use hammers, axes, and other weapons on the battlefield. Gabriel's height only reached the 2 men's chests. They wielded heavy hammers with handles in their hands, round heads embedded with sharp spikes, and smashed down from the left and right. The attack was too sudden. There was indeed a mage on the other side. It was the 3rd person standing in the shadow. He had used magic to hide his and the 2 giants' breaths before launching the fatal blow. Their position was very coincidental. If the caravan had really fallen into the trap, they would have been on both sides of Maria's carriage when the first carriage fell. They should be the main force of the ambush and could smash the whole carriage with 1 blow. But now they were used to deal with Gabriel. Gabriel had no way to dodge. The wind brought by the giant hammers shrouded him in all directions. The 2 squad leaders threw their javelins at the 2 giants, one on the left and one on the right. Roddick also made his move. His sword flew out. The tip of the sword had an inconspicuous faint halo under the sun. It was faster than the javelins, and it shot at the 3rd person behind the giant on the right. There was a deafening noise. Gabriel raised the shield in his left hand to block the falling hammer on the left. His feet and calves sank into the sand. He raised the sword in his right hand to meet the other hammer. The silver sword looked so slender at this time, as if it would shatter with a light hit. But the sword did not shatter. The hammer hit the tip of the sword almost without making a sound. The sword bent into an arc but did not break. Gabriel was murmuring something. The 2 parangons on the sword emitted a strange wave. The sword suddenly straightened again. A force that seemed to be able to distort space spread out. The giant hammer slipped to the side. The giant's body involuntarily spun half a circle. The hammer had clearly hit the tip of the sword, but it seemed to have missed. This was a divine spell, an advanced divine spell at that. As a warrior, because of the different direction of practice, it was very difficult to learn magic systematically, and it was impossible for a warrior to master magic of the same level. Gabriel, on the other hand, was able to master advanced magic. Even though it was cast through a sword that was enhanced by magic, it was still shocking enough. With a cracking sound and a strange cry, the giant man's left shoulder was dislocated. His hand dropped, and his hammerhead smashed into the sand dune. The javelins of the 2 squad leaders also arrived. The javelins aimed at the giant man on the right seemed to hit something sticky and were pulled into the sand dune by some force. The javelins missed the giant man by a few inches. Fortunately, the mage protected the giant man in time. The other javelin hit the thigh of the giant on the left. A third-level warrior's full-strength strike should be able to pierce through several bulls, but at this moment, it only penetrated a few inches. The giant's body seemed to be made of iron. But the damage was not light. The giant hammer hit Gabriel's shield, and the center of the shield was dented and deformed, showing radial cracks. The giant man's whole body was numb from the shock, and he was hit by a spear. He roared and knelt on one leg. With a clang, Gabriel pulled her leg out of the sand and rushed forward. The friction between the shield and the hammer created a series of sparks. The cracks in the center of the shield slowly disappeared, as if it could repair itself. But only a small part of it was repaired. The shield that Roddick gave her was blessed by magic, but it still couldn't withstand the giant's hammer. Gabriel took a step forward and with a thrust of her left hand, the edge of the shield spun and stabbed into the chest of the giant man. This was an axe skill. She used the shield as a battle axe. The giant let out a scream. He let go of the hammer and reached for both sides of the shield, trying to snatch it away. Gabriel didn't fight with him. She pushed forward and then let go of the shield. She leaped to the right and slashed a dazzling silver light to the right. The giant man subconsciously reached out to grab the shield in great pain, but Gabriel simply abandoned the shield and added more strength to it. The giant man hugged the shield in front of his chest and fell on his back, a javelin still stuck in his leg. This encounter was very short. The javelin shot at the giant on the right missed. The mage behind the giant was casting a spell. Roderick's sword flew towards him and strangely slowed down when it was close to him. It made a series of sounds as if something had been smashed and fell to the ground, but it just happened to pierce into one of his feet, nailing his foot to the sand. The mage let out a long cry of pain. Then he saw the desert and the sky spinning in front of him. That was Gabriel's sword light, which chopped off his head and sent it spinning away. At the same time, the silver light slashed across the waist of the huge man on the right, and it took 2 breaths of time for blood to spurt out. The man was an advanced mage, and his magic had reached the 5th level. His status was quite high. However, he was very unlucky today. In order to hide his presence, he did not launch an attack in advance, allowing a warrior like Gabriel to get so close to him. When the giant in front of him could not protect him, he was almost like a piece of meat on the chopping board. Don't forget that Gabriel could also use advanced magic. Although it was only a supplementary combat skill and was not as comprehensive as a real mage's, it was enough to kill him in this situation. Gabriel ignored the giant behind him. He abandoned his shield and rushed forward with his sword. There were still 2 enemies with axes on the sand dune in front of him. The 2 warriors, who had seemed very confident, could not help but show a trace of panic when they saw that the ambush in front of them was destroyed so quickly. They wanted to turn around and leave, but they felt that they could not escape. While they were hesitating, Gabriel had already arrived. Between life and death, they had no choice but to fight. With a shout, they swung their axes to the left and right. The blades of the axes were also covered with a faint layer of hazy light. When Gabriel rushed to the front, she suddenly accelerated. She arched her waist and bent her legs, like a lion pouncing forward. Her body shrank down and passed through the edge of the axes, slamming into the warrior on the left. Her shoulder guard hit the shield, and the tip of the shield hit the chest of the warrior. A large part of the chest plate caved in, accompanied by the sound of broken ribs. Gabriel's figure immediately bounced to the right, and she swung her sword straight at the other warrior. The handle of the axe was very long. As soon as the warrior on the right raised his axe, Gabriel suddenly appeared in front of him. It was too late for him to swing the axe down, so he hurriedly raised his shield to block the sword. The sword suddenly became extremely dazzling, as if it could tear everything apart. The shield was split in half, and the sword was inserted into the chest of the warrior. The tremor of the sword tip broke his internal organs, and then it was pulled out. The silver blade was intact, not even stained with a trace of blood. There were a few cracks on the shoulder guard of Gabriel's armor, but they were slowly mending. She turned around between the sand dunes with her sword in hand. The sun shone on her golden hair, and her beautiful face was so cold. There was no living enemy behind her. Roddick and the two captains stood between the two fallen warriors, looking at Gabriel with admiration and amazement. On the hills in the distance, in the shadow of the strange boulders, a group of people were quietly hiding, all of them looking incredulous. In the middle of the group was Firmian Schmall, the governor of Saya. On the left was his most trusted assistant, Mr. Morton, the financial officer of Saya. On the right was the high priest of the Saya shrine, the mage Cosman. Chapter 12. Behind the strange rock, in the distance, there was a group of knights, weapons in hand, in formation, ready to attack at any time. Next to them were dozens of riderless horses. Some of them were carrying supplies needed for the long journey in the desert, but most of them were war horses, whose owners had died in the fierce battle. Financial Officer Morton murmured, "How is this possible? A single person, and a woman at that, wiped out all the elites in the ambush. Even Jeremiah the high priest was sacrificed. Governor, we have too few people in this ambush." Governor Schmall's face was very ugly. "We can't mobilize the city's army to attack Dick's caravan openly. That would be a declaration of war against the Empire of Igut. We can only use the identity of bandits as a cover. Besides, it's too late to mobilize the army. As soon as we got the news, we led our guards here to set up the ambush. We've done our best." Cosman the high priest gave Governor Schmall a dissatisfied look, as if to say, "Is there such a well-trained elite bandit?" Then he turned to look at Gabriel in the distance and said gloomily, "This person must be one of the 12 supreme guardian warriors of the Temple of Isis in Memphis. What a surprise." The financial officer said reluctantly, "No matter how strong she is, she's just one person. Look, she's exhausted and seems to be injured. If we launch a sudden attack with our cavalry, we still have a chance to take the god's tier." As they spoke, Gabriel had walked back to the caravan and knelt on one knee. Her sword was half stabbed into the sand. Her face was pale, and a trace of blood seeped out of the corner of her mouth. She was praying silently. The parangan on the sword's edge emitted a soft white light that enveloped her. It was a low-level healing magic. In the fierce battle just now, Gabriel was indeed injured, especially when she used her shield to block a blow from the giant hammer. Dick had already sent his servants to clean up the battlefield. The severed limbs were buried in the sand, and the weapons and armor were collected and taken away. These were all spoils of war, and they would be important evidence to trace the origins of these bandits in the future. Seeing this scene, Governor Schmall said with some hesitation, "Although that warrior is injured, Rodrick's elite guards have not suffered any losses. Look, their cavalry is still maintaining their battle formation without moving, while we have already lost half of our men. Even High Priest Jeremiah has been sacrificed." The financial officer encouraged, "Cosman the High Priest is still here. We also have 2 low-level mages. If we attack in a formal battle formation, and the mages are protected in the center, we will definitely win." Cosman the High Priest gritted his teeth and said, "The failure of the ambush was an accident. We did not expect such a supreme warrior to appear." Decades ago, in the disaster brought by the sorcerers, the adoratress of the Isis temple had fallen, and even the god's tier on the scepter was missing. In the future, the sorcerer's pharaoh will, of Egypt. The god's tier is so important to them, but it is even more important to us. Don't forget the ancient legends. The people of Hittite also believe that the god's tier is a blessing from the gods. If we get it, it will not be Isis who blesses Igut, but Enrol who blesses Hittite. Only in this way can we gather more power to resist the empire of Igut. Governor Schmall's tone was still hesitant. "Of course I know this. Otherwise, I would not have come here with my elite guards. But you saw the battle just now. Unless we are sure that we will succeed without leaving any traces, we cannot act rashly." Cosman the high priest frowned and said, "Governor, today Jeremiah the high priest is dead, and we have lost so many men. If we fail, how will we explain it to our superiors?" Suddenly, he turned around and said with surprise and joy, "Don't worry, my lord. our respected supreme mage, Goliath, is here." The few of them turned their heads and looked into the distance behind the dune. They saw a figure dressed in a white robe slowly walking over. He seemed to be walking, but his figure was flying rapidly along the sand dune. Every now and then he would arrive in front of the group. It was an old man with a white goatee. He was not tall and wore a turban. The wrinkles on his face were deep, but his eyes were clear and sharp. He did not look like an old man at all. The old man was called Goliath. He was the chief priest of the shrine of Saya. Normally, the lord of a city would also be the chief priest, but Saya was different. It was located in a strategic location on the border. The kingdom of Babylon had specially sent a supreme mage to be the chief priest of the shrine of Saya. There were also 3 deputy high priests, namely Shmuel, Jeremiah, and Cosman. Shmuel was also one of the 3 high priests of Saya, and Jeremiah had just been killed by Gabriel's sword. A supreme mage had a high status in any part of the kingdom. Goliath was an 8th-level supreme mage, but he didn't care about daily affairs. He often traveled between the city of Saya and the capital, and he also had a part-time job in the main shrine of the kingdom. Goliath happened to be absent when Shmuel led his men to launch the ambush. How could they not be overjoyed when he arrived at this moment? It was not convenient for the knights to dismount, so they all bowed with weapons in hand. The 3 high priests also bowed respectfully and greeted, "Dear Supreme Mage, you are here? All difficulties will be solved. Please allow us to explain to you what happened here." Goliath glanced at the battlefield in the distance and waved his short staff. "I understand what happened here. You can explain it to me when we return." Morton, the financial officer, was taken aback. He knelt down and said, "Dear Supreme Mage, with your power, we can definitely seize the god's tear." Cosman also knelt down and said, "Dear Chief Priest, we are fighting for the future of the Hittite kingdom. Jeremiah is dead, and more than half of the governor's guards have been lost. If we can't seize the god's tear, how can we explain it to the people when we return?" There was a trace of regret in Goliath's eyes. He sighed and said, "I will do my best to help you. I know how precious the god's tear is, but now is not the time. Look at the huge caravan they brought with them, as well as Roderick and his personal guards. If we kill the supreme guardian of the temple of Isis and Roderick, do you know what it means?" Seeing that everyone was silent, Goliath continued, "Don't think that no one knows that you did it. Who can mobilize such a force in this place? Other than the Hittite government, there is no other possibility. The Hittite kingdom is secretly accumulating power, and we need to maintain a semblance of peace. I'm afraid that the empire of Igut does not have an excuse to destroy this force. What you have done may trigger a war ahead of time. The Hittite kingdom is not ready yet, and the time for victory is not yet ripe for Enlil." At this point, Goliath suddenly paused. He looked up at Roderick's caravan in the distance and exclaimed in a low voice, "Magic." Cosman looked back and said in confusion, "It seems to be the lowest level of magic. Why are you so surprised?" In the distance, Maria was already in the first caravan. She looked up at the sky and murmured something, her hands folded in front of her chest. A faint golden light emitted from her palms, as if her whole body was plated with a layer of holy light. The golden light shone in the air and scattered in a strange way, covering Gabriel, who was half kneeling in front of the caravan. This was the magic of the adoratress of the temple of Isis, the simplest and most profound blessing of Isis. It could only be performed with the help of the god's tear, and it was also a test for the adoratress of the temple of Isis. It was a kind of magic of blessing. It could not only cure injuries, but also relieve pain, wash away fatigue, restore physical strength, and give people confidence, strength, and courage. In short, it was equivalent to a magic that could eliminate any negative effects. The magic that Maria cast with the help of the god's tear was only the simplest low-level magic, and it was so weak that it was almost insignificant. It was just a symbol, but it was the most important symbol. Everyone around bowed to the golden light, including the armored knights, and praised the miracle that goddess Isis had given them. Roderick was overjoyed. He finally understood why Gabriel kept Maria in Duk for 3 days. And Maria did it. She really was the adoratress. In the shadow of the hill, the supreme mage Goliath sighed, maybe you were too far away, so you couldn't see it clearly with your puppet eyes. That was indeed the lowest level of blessing magic, but it was the blessing of Isis that only the adoratress of the temple of Isis can use, and it could only be summoned with the help of the god's tear. The girl in the carriage is the adoratress of the temple of Isis. I didn't expect that they already have the adoratress. Cosman's eyes widened in disbelief. How is that possible? According to the secret report I received, the god's tear was just mined 3 days ago and hasn't been sent to Montefiore yet. How could the adoratress have appeared? Goliath shook his head. I don't know everything. Maybe only the gods know. But only the adoratress of the temple of Isis can cast such a magic. So she is the adoratress. We can't do it. If we take the god's tear from the adoratress, it will arouse the hatred of the lower Igut, and the Egyptian empire will have to declare war even if it doesn't want to. After saying this, Goliath sighed with regret. The adoratress is still quite weak now. What a pity. I don't know how strong she will be in the future. Governor Schmull was very practical and immediately asked, what do you think we should do now, Supreme Mage? Evacuate immediately? Goliath shook his head again. No, inform the city to send more supplies, and then clean up the traces of the battlefield. Tomorrow, we will lead the cavalry to catch up with them, and say that we heard about the recent appearance of a powerful bandit gang in the desert, and we came to protect them. Then we will escort them all the way out of the border. Governor Schmull nodded. In that case, I will send some people to send gifts to the high priests of the Montefiore shrine. Even if they want to blame us for what happened today, there will be someone to mediate for us. Goliath looked at him with a satisfied expression. This is what a governor should think of. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.